The anime begins at the famous Regarden Magic Academy, a place where the most valued thing among the students is the talent for using magic. There, anyone who demonstrates great magical ability earns respect and recognition. But a question arises: what happens to those who do not possess this gift? For many people, these students simply have no chance at all. Without magic, they say it is impossible to evolve within the academy or achieve any prominence in academic life. At least, that is what almost everyone believes. Meanwhile, in a dungeon located on the 7th floor, we find the protagonist of the story, Will Serfort. Unlike the other students, Will cannot use even the smallest amount of magic. Even so, he faces monsters inside the dungeon to earn credits for the academy. In addition, he wants to prove to everyone that, even without magic, he is still capable of achieving results and continuing to study there. For him, the important thing is to show that he can move forward and succeed, even without possessing the ability that everyone considers essential. Next, the scene shifts to a classroom. The teacher Edward Serens is teaching magic to the students. During the lesson, he calls Will several times to come down to the front of the room and perform a practical test. However, Will is distracted while writing in his notebook and takes time to realize that he is being called. When he finally understands that the teacher is speaking to him, he immediately becomes discouraged, because he imagines that he will be forced to demonstrate magic in front of everyone. Even so, Will walks down to where Edward is. The teacher then hands him a catalyst and asks him to use it to summon a flame. Nervous, Will points the wand at the ore and recites the spell that should produce fire. However, nothing happens. This occurs because he simply cannot use magic. Upon seeing the scene, some students begin to laugh and mock him. Edward tells everyone to remain silent. Even so, clearly frustrated, he comments that it is absurd for there to be a student in that institution who cannot use even the most basic spell. According to him, Will is just a typical bookworm, someone who only stands out in theory. At that moment, a red-haired girl intervenes. She casts a fire spell with ease, causing the ore to ignite quickly and demonstrating an impressive result. The teacher then calls the student Sion Ulster and asks her not to use magic without his permission. Sion apologizes and pretends that she only wanted to help her dear friend Will, saying that it seemed like he was having difficulties. Taking advantage of the moment, Edward turns the situation into a lesson for the class. He explains that the supremacy of magic is something absolute, representing authority and power. Just like the great magical heroes, within the academy, magical talent is the main criterion of value. Therefore, according to him, someone who possesses only theoretical knowledge but cannot use magic does not deserve to be in such an honored place. He even insinuates that people with impossible dreams, like Will, should leave the academy as soon as possible. After class, Will leaves the room. Sion and some classmates surround him in the hallway and begin to mock him. They comment with disdain that he needs to enter dungeons just to kill monsters and earn a few points, saying that this is a disgrace to the academy. Suddenly, Colette appears, a 6th-year student. She immediately intervenes and confronts Sion. He replies that a student as talented as her should not waste time defending someone as unsuccessful as Will. However, Colette counters by saying that Will is a very kind person, and that he strives more than any other student. In addition, she states that she will not allow them to continue despising her friend. Sion is surprised by her attitude, but soon responds that kindness and effort are not enough to turn someone into a great mage. When Will approaches, Sion also adds that becoming a Magia Vander is an impossible dream for him. After that, she and her friends leave, saying that they do not want to waste any more time with someone so mediocre. As soon as they walk away, Colette and the small Kiki stick out their tongues at the group, clearly irritated with the situation. Next, they walk with Will through the castle corridors. Colette comments that he should not let himself be shaken either by Sion's words or by the attitude of Professor Edward, who should not have humiliated a student in that way. Will, however, admits that part of what they said is true. After all, he really cannot use any kind of magic. In addition, he comments that he even feels embarrassed for making a beautiful girl like Colette worry so much about him. Upon hearing this, Colette blushes slightly, but tries to hide it, pretending to be irritated. As she comes from a noble family, She says that she needs to maintain her posture and composure. Shortly after, she notices that Will seems lost in thought and asks what is happening. He replies only that he was admiring the beauty of the academy. The two then look at the sky, where the most powerful mages known as Magia Vander live, responsible for protecting the world. Will explains that, a long time ago, people knew nothing about the sky and the world lived immersed in chaos because of invaders coming from it. After much suffering, 5 great mages faced these threats and managed to drive them away. They sealed the sky using powerful magic and brought peace to the world. Since then, all mages share the same dream, to one day become a Magia Vander. While she continues looking at the sky, Colette asks if the woman with the ice staff is Albis, known as the Ice Maiden. Will replies that yes, and we see that she is sitting near a window, observing everything from above. At that moment, Will remembers the past. In a flashback, he appears playing with his childhood friend, the Elfaria. At that time, the two dreamed of becoming Magia Vander, so they could reach the sky and watch the sunset from there. Will became excited about Faria's dream, and the two promised that, when they grew up, they would achieve that goal together. But as the years passed, things changed a lot. Faria revealed an incredible talent for magic and ended up becoming the youngest Magia Vander in history. She left alone toward the blue sky. Meanwhile, Will followed a completely different path. He does not possess any talent and cannot use even a single drop of magic. Even so, he cannot forget that promise made when they were children. No matter how impossible it seems, Will continues fighting to achieve that dream, hoping that one day he will be able to stand by her side again. Soon after, the scene changes once again. Professor Warner is scolding Will for having returned to the dungeon without permission. In addition, he went alone all the way to the 7th floor, which is extremely dangerous. Will apologizes, but we soon discover that he does this mainly to earn credits. Taking advantage of the moment, he asks how many points he will receive for the monster he defeated. Warner becomes irritated when he realizes that this is the only thing that seems to matter to him, but replies that he will give 2 credits for the achievement. While he celebrates, an Academy staff member asks if he is still determined to become a Magia Vander. The man explains that, before reaching the Tower of Paradise, it is necessary to enter the Higher Institute. To do so, the student needs to accumulate many credits in 3 different areas: theory, practice, and spellcasting. Will is very good in the first 2, but he cannot earn points in spellcasting, precisely because he cannot use magic. Because of this, he would end up with only 7,200 credits, which makes it almost impossible to advance using only points obtained in practical battles, especially for someone who cannot use magic at all. Even after hearing all that, Will does not show the slightest intention of giving up. Warner, irritated, continues complaining to him and says that someone like Will should not even dream of becoming a Magia Vander. After all, he does not even know if he will be able to graduate, since in the last exam he did not earn any credits. In addition, there is an important test coming up next week, and to take part in it Will needs to gather certain points before the deadline. Upon hearing this, Will panics. He realizes that he has only 2 days to obtain the missing credits. Quickly, he begins reviewing his notes, looking for some monster he can defeat to complete the required score. As he analyzes everything carefully, Warner comments that there is a Baskerville on the 7th floor of the dungeon. According to him, that monster is probably waiting for someone like Will, a typical bookworm, to appear there and face it. Will become so excited by the information that he ends up hugging Warner in gratitude. The professor tries to break free, clearly uncomfortable with the boys' enthusiasm. However, without them noticing, Sion had been listening to the entire conversation. Upon understanding Will's plan, she decides to go to the dungeon first to defeat the monster before him. That way, Will would not be able to get the necessary credits and would end up being expelled from the academy. Some time later, Will heads to the dungeon accompanied by Kiki. He comments that defeating a wild Basker should not be so difficult, as long as he is careful with the creature's fire breath. Otherwise, he might end up like the boy who was burned alive the last time he faced one of those monsters. Meanwhile, Sion and some classmates are also searching for the monster in the same place. Lyral asks if he is sure that they should be exploring the 7th floor without authorization. Sion becomes irritated by the question and responds rudely, as if he were being treated like a fragile child. Even so, the group continues searching for the creature. During the search, Sion comments with disdain that he cannot stand the idea of someone who cannot use magic wanting to become a Magia Vander. Shortly after, when they were about to use magic to locate the monster more quickly, something unexpected happens. One of the boys is struck by a violent blow and thrown against the wall. Apparently, he met a very unpleasant fate. Lyral panics upon seeing that. Her screams echo through the dungeon corridors and reach Will's ears, who was in another area. Without wasting time, he runs toward the sound to find out what is happening. When he finally arrives at the location, Will realizes that only Sion is still standing. She is desperately fighting against a creature that is definitely not a Baskerville. In fact, it is a malevolent sentinel, a huge monster that carries a gigantic sword. This creature is worth 10 credits and has a level higher than 5. Hidden behind a wall, Will watches the scene and becomes confused. He wonders why a monster like that is on that floor of the dungeon, since it should appear only on much deeper levels. While thinking about it, he realizes that Sion's magic is having no effect on the creature. For a moment, Will thinks about leaving. He wonders if he really needs to save someone who has always treated him with disdain since he entered the academy. Sion has never done anything other than mock him. If he simply ran away, perhaps no one would find out. But then he remembers Elfaria, who always said that Will was a kind person, someone with a truly noble heart. Even knowing that he might not be that incredible, he decides to act because he wants to become someone worthy of her. Determined, he runs into the battle and interrupts the Sentinel's attack. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Edward finds Warner and tells him that Sion and 2 other students went to the dungeon. Since the place is enormous, Edward asks him to use his familiar to locate them on the 6th floor. However, Warner notices something different. They are on the same floor as Will. He then shows everything through his crystal sphere and tells Edward that there is no reason to worry, because Will is there as well. At that moment, Will continues facing the Sentinel. He manages to narrowly dodge several of the creature's attacks. Despite the monster's strength, its blows cannot hit Will, thanks to the boy's incredible speed. Sion watches everything, completely surprised. He cannot believe that this is the same Will he always called useless. On the other side, Edward is also shocked to see what is happening. Warner then explains that Will is a very unusual case. Even without possessing magic, he has an impressive physical strength, comparable to that of a dwarf. In addition, his ability to observe the enemy's movements allows him to anticipate attacks with almost perfect precision. The Sentinel tries to strike Will once again, but he had already predicted the movement. With a quick blow, he cuts off one of the creature's arms. Then, he grabs his sword and, accepting that he might be the only warrior in a world dominated by magic, concentrates all his strength into a single attack. The strike is so powerful that it pierces through the Sentinel with ease, completely destroying the monster. After the battle, Will extends his hand to Sion, who remains on the ground, unable to believe what just happened. For the first time, he realizes that Will may be much stronger than he had imagined. Watching everything through the sphere, Edward cannot accept that someone without magic can demonstrate so much power. Some time later, Warner gives Will the 10 credits for defeating the Sentinel. Even thinking that the boy is a bit annoying, he acknowledges the achievement. Will becomes extremely happy upon receiving the points. Thus begins the story of a boy who might turn the magical world upside down. A story where the union between a sword and a wand can create something completely unexpected. Soon after, we see a flashback from 5 years ago. At that time, Will was only 10 years old. Many students mocked him, saying that he only served as bait so that Faria could enter the academy. Now that she had become a Magia Vander, they said that he was no longer necessary. Some time later, Warner took Will to the principal's office so they could evaluate whether he could continue studying at the academy. The woman hands a knife to the boy and summons several magical seals at the same time. Without hesitation, Will reacts quickly and blocks all the attacks. Warner is left completely speechless upon seeing that. The principal laughs and says that, even without magic, that boy is extremely interesting. To her, it is as if Will were trying to use a sword in place of a wand. With tears in his eyes, Will asks if, by studying at the academy, he could one day climb the tower and reach Faria. The principal replies that, if he continues to be fast, determined, and with a strong will, perhaps that may become possible. Full of hope, Will leaves the office believing even more in the dream of becoming a Magia Vander. After he leaves, the principal comments to Warner that she feels sorry for the boy. Since he does not have a magical guardian, everything depends only on his own efforts. Even so, she wants to see how far that story can go. Back in the present, Warner explains once again how someone can become a Magia Vander. The first step is to enter the higher institute, where only the best are accepted. There are two main ways to achieve this. The first is to create a new type of magic, something completely original. The second is to gather 7,200 credits during studies at the lower academy. Since almost no one is able to create a new form of magic, most students try to reach the second path. Even so, Warner reminds everyone that many students cannot even graduate. Because of that, no one should talk so early about entering the higher institute. Right after saying that, he surprises the class by announcing an extra practical lesson. For Will, and for many other students, the real challenge is only just beginning. After the difficult class finally ends, Colette finds Will in the academy corridors. She comments that he no longer has many credits left to earn in the theoretical subjects. Will replies that this happens because he always fails in the spellcasting part, but that does not mean he will give up. On the contrary, he states that he will keep trying. In addition, he says that he has a lot of respect for Professor Warner, since not every teacher would take the time to offer extra classes to help students. Many would simply leave the students to deal with their difficulties on their own. Colette agrees with him and comments that Edward, for example, certainly would not do something like that. While they talk calmly, some students pass by nearby, excitedly commenting that Sion defeated a malevolent sentinel alone, which is worth 10 credits. In reality, Lyral is spreading this false story to improve Sion's reputation. He knows that it is not true, but remains silent. Instead, he keeps thinking about what really happened and how Will, someone who cannot use magic, was the one who defeated the monster. At that moment, Will walks right in front of them. As soon as he sees him, Sion feels the urge to attack him immediately. However, Colette steps in front and prevents any conflict. Unable to do anything, Sion ends up walking away, frustrated. After he leaves, Colette asks Will if something happened between the two of them. Will replies that yes, but assures her that it was nothing important. Next, the scene changes. Edward appears talking to the headmistress Cauldron. He demands that Will Serfort be expelled from the academy immediately. Cauldron asks what would be the reason for such an extreme decision. After all, Will is already in his final year, and expelling him now would not make much sense. Edward insists that the academy was created to train mages, not warriors. For him, it is unacceptable that someone incapable of using magic can surpass the other students. Clearly irritated, he shows a certain envy of the situation. Cauldron then opens a book with Will's records and shows his excellent grades in theoretical exams and in several academic reports. According to her, these results are quite impressive. She explains that, if they ignore the fact that he cannot use magic, Will could be considered an excellent student. Perhaps he cannot become a Magia Vander, but he could still follow other important paths, such as becoming a magical craftsman, a healer, or taking on other roles within the magical world. For Cauldron, the academy should form scholars prepared to face the future. Edward replies that all of that may sound good in theory, but Will does not want to become a simple academic. He wants to be a Magia Vander, and that is exactly what makes everything so problematic. Realizing that the discussion is dragging on too long, Cauldron suggests a solution. She proposes that Edward conduct a personal test with Will. That way, he could prove that the boy is incapable of achieving that goal and then decide on his expulsion. Edward immediately accepts, smiling with confidence. Unlike Warner, he does not intend to show any mercy. After leaving the room, he seems completely satisfied. Once he is gone, Cauldron comments to herself that she hopes that Test will help Will finally face the truth. According to her, no one understands the path to becoming a Magia Vander better than the mysterious dark mage of the Viper. In another scene, we see Will studying together with Colette. He is working very hard because he knows that if he loses even a single credit, he will not be able to enter the higher institute. At the moment, he is writing about the history of the dwarves, describing how they were brave warriors who faced extremely powerful magic without ever giving up. While explaining this to Colette, Will comments that a person's determination and willpower can overcome even magic. However, Colette seems a bit distracted, observing some strands of gray hair that he has on his head. She even jokes that he should get some rest. Suddenly, Edward appears and tells the two of them to stop making noise. Then, he orders Will to follow him immediately to the spellcasting practice room. When they arrive there, Edward makes it clear that this will be an extra lesson, motivated by Will's constant inability to use magic. Without explaining the reason very well, Edward casts a powerful spell right in front of him. Will becomes completely confused and asks what is happening. Then Edward reveals the rules of the test. If Will manages to land just one hit, he will receive 5 credits in spellcasting. However, if he fails, he will have to leave the academy immediately. According to Edward, someone without talent should not even dream of becoming a Magia Vander. Right after saying that, he casts the first spell and orders Will to prepare to fight. The battle begins suddenly, catching the boy completely off guard. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Warner meets Cauldron, who had called him to explain everything that is happening. She shows, through a magical sphere, the fight between Edward and Will. Warner is shocked and asks what is going on. Cauldron explains that Edward is testing Will, and that no one can interfere. According to her, if Will wishes to be recognized as a candidate for Magia Vander, he must face this kind of challenge. Warner finds all of this extremely unfair and even cruel. He remembers that Edward almost became a Magia Vander in the past. He came very close to the top, but ended up being defeated and never managed to achieve the title. Even so, Cauldron insists that the test must continue. Back to the fight, Edward begins casting spells continuously against Will. The boy tries to dodge all the attacks, but soon begins to grow exhausted. Even though it is low-level dark magic, the spells are still extremely powerful. At one moment, Will runs quickly toward Edward and tries to land a kick. However, the teacher's defense is practically impenetrable. The impact is so strong that it ends up pushing Will back, even causing his glasses to fall to the ground. He watches in amazement the way Edward casts spells without even needing to recite them, maintaining both perfect defense and attack. Even almost out of strength, Will tries to stand up again. Edward then comments that he will use only 2 spells against him: his black flames, capable of burning him completely, and his magical shield, which can block any attempt of physical attack. He activates Magical Doctrine number 27 and states that someone incapable of mastering 1,000 spells should at least try to master a single spell with perfection. Will begins to pay attention to his words and realizes that Edward is using overlapping spells, creating a true rain of attacks called Dax Darrens. Will tries to escape quickly, but Edward gives him no chance. The blows fall one after another, while he moves his wand as if he were conducting an orchestra of destruction. In the end, Will ends up falling to the ground, completely injured. He admits to himself that he cannot defeat a high-level mage like Edward. Even so, he thinks that perhaps things would be different if he at least had his sword with him. Meanwhile, Colette continues waiting in the corridors, near the lockers. She begins to find everything very strange. Edward had never shown any interest in helping Will, so why would he suddenly decide to give extra lessons? The more she thinks about it, the more she believes that something is wrong. At that moment, Kiki appears running and makes a gesture indicating Will's locker. Colette immediately understands that he may be in danger. When we return to the practice room, we see Will lying on the ground after receiving several attacks from Edward. The teacher approaches and coldly says that the Magia Vander are elite mages. If Will cannot defeat him, then he will never have any chance against one of them. While Edward presses Will's head against the ground with his foot, he recalls an old story about the Battle of the Dwarves. According to him, it only took a single powerful mage to eliminate 10,000 dwarves at once. For Edward, that was the definitive proof that a sword could never reach the same level of power as a magical wand. Because of that, he advises Will to completely abandon this absurd fantasy of becoming a Magia Vander. Even in that humiliating situation, Will manages to break free. He firmly declares that he will never give up on his dream, holding tightly the glasses he received from Feria. He states that all he wants is to fulfill the promise he made to Elfaria. The only reason he continues fighting is to be able to stand by the side of the person he loves. Edward becomes outraged upon hearing that and asks, with disdain, if something as simple as love is really what motivates Will to try to reach the top of the magical world. Will replies that yes, even if the path is difficult and everyone considers it ridiculous, he will continue moving forward until he can reach the one he loves and watch the sunset by her side. At that moment, Colette arrives running, desperate. Without thinking twice, she throws Will's sword in his direction. He catches it in the air and stands up with determination, preparing to face Edward once again. For Edward, using a sword in a fight between wand users is something completely absurd. Even so, he responds by releasing another dark magic spell. What he did not expect was that Will would manage to cut through that magic using the Sword of Moria. Irritated, Edward releases an even greater explosion of power. Will feels the true terror of the 1,000 black flames surrounding him. The energy released is so intense that he clearly realizes the enormous gap that exists between him and a true Magia Vander. For a moment, he feels the urge to run away. However, he knows that he cannot retreat. Determined, Will breaks through the barrier of flames and advances once again toward Edward. Colette shouts, asking the teacher to stop, but Edward continues attacking with everything he has. Even so, Will keeps moving forward step by step. As he runs toward the enemy, he remembers once again the old story of the dwarves. He states that that battle was not as Edward described. Among the dwarves there was a warrior named Garrett, who continued fighting even after all the others had fallen. Despite being alone, he managed to land a blow against the enemy mage. Garrett's feat was so impressive that even the mages themselves recognized his courage. Inspired by that story, Will decides to prove that a sword can also cut through magic. In the next instant, he leaps with all his strength. The sword pierces through Edward's magical barrier and destroys his defensive shield. Will manages to reach the teacher and touch his hand, leaving only a small scratch. Edward immediately steps back, furious. Even so, he admits that Will fulfilled the condition. He managed to land a hit, and therefore earned 5 credits in spellcasting. Shortly after, Will collapses to the ground completely exhausted, and Colette runs to help him. Watching everything through magic, Cauldron is impressed by the result. She comments that Will manage to advance without caring about anything other than his own physical strength, using pure determination to break through Edward's defense. Meanwhile, in the surroundings of the academy, a strange blonde girl with an almost psychotic behavior appears preparing something mysterious related to Will. The scene then shifts to a flashback. In it, we see Feria handing the glasses to Will. She says that he is the kindest and bravest person she knows. After that, she says goodbye to him. Even sad, Will promises that one day he will also reach the tower, no matter how many difficulties appear along the way. For him, what matters is that one day the two of them can watch the sunset together. Feria smiles upon hearing that and promises that she will wait as long as necessary for that reunion to happen. In that difficult moment, Warner was there to comfort the boy. Will then promises that he will never again allow sadness to make him feel weak or useless. Returning to the present, we see Will walking through the streets of the district called Slungland. Since he does not possess magical talent, he decided to dedicate himself as much as possible to his studies and work. Among his tasks is delivering all the correspondence in the region. During one of these deliveries, he briefly talks with an elderly man and soon continues on his way. At a certain moment, he trips and almost drops all the newspapers he was carrying. Only one of them ends up slipping away. When picking it up, Will notices something important. The news reports that the Higher Institute sent a special order to the academy related to an elf student. Surprised, he immediately runs home and calls his friend Rosti, asking for help. Will explains that he needs Rosti to build a magical object for him, because Feria requested a special contribution. Determined to help, he wants to do everything within his reach. Rosti, seeing his friend's excitement, asks what kind of work will be necessary. Will explains that he needs to obtain ice cores from ice walkers. creatures that possess very valuable magical catalysts. The Academy is offering rewards to those who manage to gather these materials. Rosti comments that Will remains as enthusiastic as ever. After finishing the magical object, he says that he made some improvements compared to the previous version. Will thanks him and already prepares to run off again. But before he leaves, Rosti notices that Will is so excited that he forgot to eat. So he places a piece of bread directly into his mouth to make sure he has enough energy. In another scene, we learn more about the history of magic. One of the great pioneers of the magical world, Queen Mercedes, taught that all magical knowledge originates from dungeons. According to her, true mages must use their wisdom to explore these places, discover the unknown, and acquire new knowledge, because everything in the world is connected. Soon after, we see Will and other students exploring the 4th floor of the dungeon while carrying out the mission to help Faria. In another area of the place, Sion is surrounded by students who praise him. They watch in amazement as he defeats several ice walkers using magic. Despite receiving all that admiration, Sion cannot feel satisfied. He keeps remembering Will's surprising strength and how he was saved by him during the fight against the malevolent sentinel. Meanwhile, Will decides to advance even deeper into the dungeon. He knows that if he takes too long, other students may collect all the materials before him. Suddenly, he encounters some strange monsters along the way. The creatures look like aggressive penguins, so he starts calling them demon penguins in his mind. They were about to attack a student when Will appears. With a few quick movements, he defeats the monsters and takes control of the situation. The girl watches in surprise as she realizes that academy student is using a sword, not a wand. She thanks him for the help and introduces herself as Iris Churchill, a 4th-year student. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Warner explains to his students that creating a new type of magic is the greatest achievement possible for a mage. Anyone who accomplishes this automatically advances toward the Tower of Paradise. In addition, new spells are often named after their creators or associated with something that represents them. A famous example is the dark magic spell Dax Darwikins, whose name comes from the ancient mage known as Darbinsons, the firefighter. Warner continues explaining that if any student manages to create a new spell, their name will likely be remembered in history forever. However, everyone there knows that this is much easier said than done. Inventing an original form of magic is extremely difficult, almost impossible for most mages, and therefore this path to success seems very far from reality. At that moment, a girl raises her hand and asks if the elven mage who appeared in the newspaper is really as powerful as they say. Warner responds with complete honesty that yes. He explains that she is on a completely different level from the rest of the mages. After all, there has never been anyone capable of creating 12 original spells on their own. For him, that alone would be enough to place her among the greatest mages who have ever existed. As soon as he finishes speaking, the students begin whispering, impressed by the magnitude of her talent. Among them is a curious boy who, by coincidence, looks a lot like Faria, and he listens to the conversation attentively. Meanwhile, Colette comments that Will's childhood friend really is an incredible person. In addition, the entire academy is being stirred because of the mission she requested. A classmate next to her notices that Colette seems a little jealous when talking about Elfaria and says that this is completely normal. After all, someone so extraordinary could easily attract all of Will's attention. Colette feels embarrassed upon hearing that. For a moment, she wonders if Will ended up going alone to the dungeon just because of Faria. But before she can continue thinking about it, Warner notices the side conversation and tells everyone to be quiet and pay attention to the lesson. Returning to the dungeon, Iris asks Will if he is the famous older student everyone talks about, the one who cannot use magic and whom many consider completely incompetent. Her honesty catches Will off guard, leaving him quite embarrassed. Soon after, he discovers that Iris is only 14 years old and is already in the 4th year, something impressive. Even so, Will asks if she does not despise him because of everything people say about him at the academy. Iris replies that she has no reason at all to do that. On the contrary, she states that she could never despise someone who saved her life. In addition, Iris explains that she respects people who have different talents, even if they are not related to magic. Upon hearing these words, Will becomes a little nervous and tries to change the subject. He asks if she is also in the dungeon because of some task. Iris answers that yes, she wants to help Elfaria, because her dream is to become a Magia Vander and protect the sky. Upon hearing that, Will remembers that ordinary people, in fact, do not know the true sky. The current world is protected by an enormous barrier created by the Magia Vander themselves. This barrier forms an artificial sky that hides the true reality. According to ancient stories, if that barrier were ever to disappear, a great darkness would take over the world and a terrible calamity would arise. For that reason, many students follow the orders of the Magia Vander not only out of admiration, but also because they believe they are helping to maintain this great barrier that protects everyone. While Will thinks about this, Iris says that once she had the opportunity to meet Elfaria in person. She explains that, on that occasion, she was trapped inside a dungeon, completely surrounded by monsters. When she thought she had no way out and was going to die, Elfaria suddenly appeared and saved her life. For Iris, that moment was like seeing a goddess descending from the sky. She speaks with great excitement about that moment and says that she hopes to be able to see her again someday. While the conversation continues, Will is looking for signs of the ice walkers. He explains that these creatures usually leave trails of ice fragments on the ground, normally measuring between 1 and 10 millimeters. However, upon observing the ground more carefully, he finds a piece of ice that is more than twice the normal size. This indicates that there is probably a much larger monster in that cave. Upon hearing that, Iris becomes frightened. She suggests that maybe it would be better to retreat, since facing something of that size would not be a good idea. However, Will enters the cave without thinking twice. For him, magic is something incredible, but it is not everything, especially inside a dungeon. Their experience and strategy also make a big difference. In addition, he trusts his own methods to deal with dangerous situations. Iris still does not fully understand what he means, but suddenly Will notices a flash coming toward him. He reacts quickly, dodging the attack and pulling Iris back to protect her. Soon they realize that it was not an ice walker, but rather a frost rex, the most powerful ice monster on that floor of the dungeon. The creature is worth 6 credits and has a level higher than 5. The frost rex fires a powerful beam of ice, but Will manages to dodge and quickly places Iris in a safe spot. She begs him not to face the monster, explaining that physical attacks do not work against that creature. The frost rex's body is made of solid ice, capable of freezing anyone with its power. That is why it is known as a true dwarf killer. Normally, it can only be defeated with long-range magic. Even so, Will states that there is no reason to worry. He assures her that he has faced monsters like that before. The Frost Rex begins to charge another ice attack and fires it directly at Will. However, he manages to dodge it with ease, running quickly across the frozen area of the cave. Taking advantage of an opening, Will uses a magical device he received from Rosti. He wraps the monster's body with the equipment and waits a few seconds before activating it. Soon after, a large explosion of fire takes over the place. When everything finally calms down, Will mentally thanks Rosti. The new devices are much better than the old ones, and thanks to them he was able to execute his strategy. The Frost Rex is especially weak against explosions and fire attacks, which made the plan even more efficient. After the battle, Will begins searching for the monster's ice core. Meanwhile, Iris watches everything in silence. Standing a bit apart, she begins to realize that the rumors about Will at the academy are completely different from reality. While she is lost in thought, Will approaches and says that it is already time to go back. They have already gathered enough materials for the mission. Iris quickly changes her expression and thanks him for the help. Some time later, we see Iris arriving at the Tower of Mages. As she walks, she thinks that Will, even without magic, makes up for it with creative attacks, using magical devices and his incredible physical strength. In addition, he demonstrates a great combat instinct and a lot of experience inside dungeons. Upon reaching her destination, she fixes her hair, removes her glasses, and knocks on a large door, asking permission to enter the room of the Magia Vander. As soon as the door opens, we find several of them gathered: Cariat Incendia Wisman, Porcius, Eleanor, and Elfaria Alvisford. Cariat allows Iris to speak, since at that moment they were only participating in yet another rather boring meeting. In addition, everyone there knows that if the barrier protecting the world were broken at that instant, the entire world would be lost. Soon after, Co and Eleanor begin to discuss what may happen in the future. They know that the celestial inhabitants observe everything from the sky, and that, at the moment, they do not have enough strength to face them. Because of this, they believe it will be necessary to find new promising talents before the day of destiny, as they cannot allow the prophecy to become reality. At that moment, Iris, or rather Watcher, as Co usually calls her, comments that during her time at the academy she found someone very interesting. It is Will Serfort, the magicless student everyone talks about. After observing him carefully, she believes that the ideal would be to allow him access to the tower. The proposal, however, is rejected almost immediately by Cariat and Eleanor. Even so, Co comments that the idea seems amusing, and Faria also shows agreement. Eleanor, in turn, makes it clear that she is against it. She does not like the idea of surrounding herself with people she considers inferior. In response, someone states that, to him, the most important thing is that each person can be useful. The conversation begins to grow tense, and the tension among them increases. But Cariat interrupts the discussion before it escalates. He advises everyone not to make hasty decisions. Soon the great magical festival will take place, and after seeing the participants' results, they will be able to decide more calmly. After all, only the most capable will be able to reach the top. After that, everyone begins to leave the place quickly, with the exception of Faria. Taking advantage of the moment, Iris approaches and comments to her that the young man she mentioned is truly someone very interesting. Faria responds with a slight smile. Then, upon summoning a magical core, she says that Will is waiting for her with great anticipation. Some time later, the academy students prepare to begin the final test. The exam consists of facing several steel golems, creatures controlled by magic. The objective is simple: defeat them and demonstrate combat ability. As soon as the test begins, one of the first to destroy his opponent is Sion, using his powerful green fire magic. Shortly after, Serfort and Colette take action. Colette uses her earth magic to guide her attacks with precision. As a result, Sion finishes the test with 9,889 credits, while Colette reaches 7,340. After them, it is Will's turn. He faces his steel golem and engages in a very difficult battle. When he is finally about to defeat it, an arrogant student comments out loud, asking why someone like Regarden would be fighting using only his fists instead of using a wand like everyone else. This comment ends up distracting Will for a moment. Because of that, he receives a strong blow from the golem and is thrown far away. In another part of the field, two impressive students enter the scene: Lehana Owens and WHTNL Lendor. Lehana masters lightning magic, while WHTNL controls wind magic. During the test, Lehana destroys her golem by firing several electric arrows, hitting the enemy repeatedly until destroying it. With that, she earns 10,100 credits. Meanwhile, WHTNL finishes his test by summoning a powerful tornado, which completely shatters the steel golem, guaranteeing 1075 credits. Even so, when everyone believes that nothing could surpass that, Julius Rienberg appears. With great confidence, he creates several ice stones and quickly launches them against all the remaining golems. As soon as these stones touch the creature's armor, they transform into frozen roses. Then Julius simply says the word "release," and immediately all the golems become completely frozen and deactivated. With this impressive technique, he finishes the test with 1048 credits. When the test ends, Lehana comments that she did not imagine the others would still be so skilled. WHTNL replies that there was no reason to think otherwise. He also says that she does not need to worry, as soon they will all be celebrating her promotion within the academy. At that moment, Julius approaches them and throws an ice rose, almost as if he were declaring war. He states that now he will be able to defeat them using his new secret technique. Even so, Lehana and WHTNL are not intimidated. Combining wind and lightning magic, they easily destroy the small frozen rose. These three students are the only ones who manage to surpass the mark of 10,000 credits. which is not a surprise to anyone, since it practically confirms their promotion to the higher Institute of Magic. Meanwhile, Will watches everything from afar. Upon seeing those results, he begins to think that perhaps he does not have enough credits to graduate, much less to enter the higher institute. After all, credits serve as proof of each student's strength. Up to that moment, Will has only 5 credits, and that is his final year at the academy. Thinking about that, he ends up feeling discouraged as he walks. His friend Kiki tries to comfort him, but suddenly Julius, who is passing nearby, snarls with disdain and tells Will to get out of the way. Next, the scene changes. Will and Colette are sitting while eating together. Suddenly, Colette stands up abruptly and says that maybe there is still a chance that someone might want to recruit him. But she also states that he needs to be realistic. Reaching the higher institute with only theory and physical effort will not be enough. Even so, she remembers that there has already been a case in which a student with less than 7,200 credits ended up being recruited. Despite that, Will remains worried. After all, that year the Great Magic Festival will take place, and all the students want to stand out by showing their best spells. This festival takes place at Regarden Academy every 2 years. During the event, several competitions are held. It is at this moment that the high mages of the tower observe the participants to evaluate their abilities and choose possible candidates. Colette then explains that, in the end, everything comes down to duels between the tower factions, where it is decided who will be chosen and who will be left out. These factions are Torsius Phase, the Lord of Lightning; Liffen, the Sacred Elf; Albis; Vina, the Ice Maiden; Barum, the Emperor of Flames; and finally Mysterious Noah, the Sovereign of Light. Each of these factions is led by a powerful magic wielder. If a student is chosen by one of them, they will have direct access to the tower. Even so, Will remembers that it is not simple to ignore the normal graduation process and be recruited directly. For that to happen, the student would need to demonstrate extraordinary magic, capable of impressing even a great mage. Colette, however, comments that there are rumors about another possibility. They say that during the Great Festival, observers also appear, people responsible for searching for special talents for the tower. While the two are talking, Iris passes very close to them. She hears part of the conversation and watches them with a curious smile. Will then states that he does not intend to draw attention at the festival. He prefers to work behind the scenes, helping with the organization of the event. Colette insists that he should participate, saying that if people saw him fighting, they might change their opinion about him. Will thanks her for the concern, but believes that, in his case, the festival would be like participating in a regular sports event. For him, it would not make much difference. He remembers that he already had a bad experience during his second year, when he ended up failing in front of everyone. At that time, several students at the school began to mock him and treat him poorly. After recalling all that, the two remain there, reflecting on what may happen in the future. As they walk, Will and Colette observe other students training. Some practice creating magical creatures, while others try to summon spiritual guardians. Seeing all that movement leaves Colette quite excited, as this festival seems very different from the previous ones. This time, it will not be only the tower observers who will be present. Recruiters from various capitals will also attend the presentations. This means that even if some students are not chosen for the tower, they might still find other opportunities in different places. Because of that, Colette believes that no one should miss the chance to show their abilities. The problem is that, for Will, the situation is complicated. He does not possess magic, so he has no way to demonstrate anything in that type of competition. Even so, Colette ignores the detail for a moment and approaches some old lockers nearby. They are protected by a very well-hidden magical barrier, equipped with an inhibitor and a sound-dampening system. Someone with magic could break it by force, but Colette prefers to use Kiki. The small creature uses the magical stone on its head to locate the hidden barrier and carefully undo it. After they manage to open the access, they find a hidden staircase. Upon hearing noises coming from the lower floor, they decide to go down quickly. Down there, they find several academy students gathered, participating in a clandestine betting system. They are placing bets to try to predict who will win or lose during the magic festival. Nearby is Sion, accompanied by his group of arrogant friends. As soon as he notices Will, he immediately prepares to provoke him as usual. But, to his surprise, Colette steps in front and points her wand directly at his face. She threatens him firmly, making it clear that she does not want any kind of trouble. She also warns that if he bothers Will again without reason, she will truly become angry. At that moment, Will asks why Sion is participating in illegal betting. The answer he receives is simple: it is none of his business. Even so, Sion's own classmates end up unintentionally revealing that he is only there because he heard some students commenting that there is a big difference in power between him and the 3 strongest students at the academy. What really bothers him is seeing everyone talk about them while completely ignoring his presence. Irritated, Sion begins to shout that he spent an entire month in silence, training to rebuild his reputation. He states that he is not worried, because the others only have an advantage in theory, while in real magical ability he can still surpass them. He also says that they have not yet managed to defeat him, and that it will never happen. Even so, he realizes that he is practically justifying himself to someone he considers an idiot, so he decides to stop talking. Later, Will finishes one of the day's classes and wakes Kiki so they can leave. When he is about to go out, Colette asks if he has any plans, because she would like to accompany him to the training dungeon. Will smiles and apologizes, explaining that he needs to go work at Gina's tavern, so he will not have time for that. Colette ends up getting irritated with the answer. That same night, on Slunglin Street, located outside the great capital of magic, stands Gina's tavern. The place is known for receiving many dwarf miners who spend the night drinking to forget the fatigue of their work. Their laughter and loud conversations can be heard from the other side of the street. In the kitchen, Gina prepares a large bean stew for one of the customers. Meanwhile, Will works there as a waiter on some days of the week. During the day he studies at the academy, and at night he helps at the tavern. He does this because he received a scholarship, so he needs to work to cover other expenses. Even though it is tiring, he takes everything very seriously. At a certain moment, he delivers an order to a dwarf named Donan. The dwarf comments that the magic festival is about to begin and says that maybe Will could get some kind of financial help by participating. Will replies that he cannot compete, but Gina immediately scolds him. She says that he should talk less and work more, and also follow the example of his colleague Rosti, who is working with great enthusiasm. Soon after, Will begins to clean a huge pile of dishes. With some difficulty, Rosti tries to cheer him up, saying that he does a great job, especially considering that he is someone who does not possess magic. Since they are roommates, Rosti states that he will always do his best to help him. After finishing almost all the tasks of the night, the two begin washing the dishes so they can finally leave. During the conversation, Rosti remembers that dwarves usually do not pay very well. He suggests that maybe Will could talk to Professor Warner, who might be able to get him a better job. Will replies that the professor already worries a lot about him and that he does not want to keep bothering him. In addition, he says that he likes working there because Donan and the other dwarves have always treated him well since he arrived. Because of that, he has a lot of respect for all of them. While they are putting away the utensils in the cabinet, a spoon slips from Will's hands at the exact moment Julius unexpectedly enters the tavern. As soon as he enters, Julius begins to complain, saying that the place looks like a pigsty. When he notices Will, he starts mocking him, calling him an idiot and saying that he fits perfectly in that place full of barbarians smoking cigars. Upon hearing that, Donan stands up angrily, but a friend holds him back to avoid trouble. Even so, Julius continues provoking them. He states that dwarves are merely members of an inferior race and that they should be grateful for being able to live in that country thanks to the compassion of others. While he speaks, Will remains silent, continuing to organize the utensils. At the same time, he remembers everything that happened when the celestial inhabitants destroyed the dwarves' kingdom, forcing many of them to flee to other places. Since then, both elves and dwarves have suffered prejudice in many places, and there is a very clear rule: if one of them attacks a mage, their entire race will be punished for it. At that moment, Julius shouts at Will and demands that he bring food and drink immediately. Donan's blood begins to boil with anger because of the mage's arrogant attitude. Even so, Rosti reluctantly brings a beet soup to the table. Julius and his friends begin to laugh at the appearance of the food. They mock the dish, the tavern, and also the dwarves. Then Julius shouts that everyone there is nothing more than little demons who should leave that country. At that instant, Will's patience reaches its limit. He takes off his apron and walks straight to the table. Rosti tries to stop him, but he has already reached Julius. Firmly, Will demands that he take back what he said about the beans. He explains that that dish represents the knowledge and effort of the dwarves, who cultivate their food with great hard work, even under the most difficult conditions. He states that it is not something that anyone should ridicule simply for amusement. The entire tavern falls silent. Gino watches the scene carefully. Julius responds with disdain. He says that just because the dwarves work hard, it does not mean they do not smell bad. To him, it is still something repulsive. Then he grabs the bowl of beans and kicks it toward Will, spreading food all over the floor and creating a huge mess. Julius's helpers also move forward to attack. They believe they will be able to hit Will easily, but only fools would think that, with speed, Will grabs both of them by the neck and throws them to the ground, leaving them unconscious. After that, he faces Julius and says that the hatred that exists between them no longer makes much sense. But the contempt that Julius shows toward the dwarves is even worse. For Will, anyone who acts that way ends up being worse than any beast. Julius, however, just laughs at the situation. For him, all of this is just a way to humiliate Will in front of everyone. Without wasting time, he uses his magic to freeze the entire tavern and begins attacking from multiple angles at the same time. Will manages to dodge many blows, evading with agility, but Julius concentrates even more power and manages to immobilize him with ice. Then he slowly approaches and points his wand, making an ice rose appear on Will's chest while smiling arrogantly. At that moment, Donan shouts for Julius to stop before he crosses all limits. When Julius prepares to freeze Will completely, he notices the boy's firm gaze. That expression makes him change his mind. It seems that simply leaving him trapped in ice would not be enough. Then Julius decides something else. He points his wand at Will and orders him to participate in the Great Magic Festival. His intention is simple. He wants to humiliate him in front of the entire academy. Will manages to break the ice quickly and pulls the wand from Julius's hand by the tip. Donan asks both of them to stop immediately, but Rosti realizes that it is already too late to avoid the confrontation. Julius declares out loud that he will win and destroy everything that Will has built within the academy. Will accepts the challenge, but sets one condition. If he wins, Julius will have to apologize to Donan and the other dwarves. Sometime later, the day of the Great Magic Festival finally arrives. As the students gather, Calderon addresses everyone and gives a brief speech. He encourages the students to do their best, to use all their potential, and to never use their abilities for evil. After those words, he officially declares the festival open, and the entire academy begins to move. Among the observers is Rode Holland, a scout from the Fire faction. He orders that each group of participants be analyzed carefully, because in that place there may be true rough diamonds waiting to be discovered. Soon after, the sky race begins, an aerial race. Lahana quickly takes the lead, surpassing almost all the other competitors. The friends Snow and Flate comment that this was expected, since Lahana has always been one of the best. Beside them, a red-haired student comments that she finds it strange that the so-called Princess of the Earth is not participating in the magic competitions that year. Among the audience, many recruiters observe every detail carefully. All of them want to find new talented mages to take to the tower. This happens because, during the festival, mages from different places compete to recruit the most promising students. Meanwhile, Miss Perfect continues to demonstrate her impressive skill. She maintains her position and ends up breaking a new academy record, winning her second consecutive sky race and surpassing previous champions by a wide margin. After the race, she decides to also participate in the crown attack, saying that she could not abandon a maiden in danger. In truth, this happens because Colette, in a moment of urgency, asks her to join their group, since they are lacking members. The red-haired girl feels pleased at the thought that she will have the opportunity to spend more time with Colette. She believes that she was chosen by her own merit, and not that useless Will, as she usually thinks. However, when she arrives at the meeting point, she is surprised to see Will already there. A few hours later, the afternoon events of the festival begin. Mike Mayu is responsible for commenting on the event. He complains out loud that he has to share the job with Professor Edward, one of the least popular people in the academy. Mike says that he will have a major headache working with someone like him. Edward responds by releasing a dark aura, saying that Mike does not need to worry because all that awaits him is just a small coffin for the next class. After this exchange of provocations, Mike announces the entrance of the members of the Elven faction, who activate a powerful magic to prepare the testing field. Thanks to the elves' spell, the terrain transforms completely. Several different areas appear: a volcanic zone, a swamp, a desert, an open plain, and also a region full of trees. That entire environment becomes the battlefield for the next competition. Unlike the other tests, the crown attack is contested by teams of 3 people. The groups start at the edges of the field and need to advance toward the central stadium, where the crown is located. But the path will not be simple. In addition to the natural obstacles, the professors have also placed several traps throughout the terrain to make the challenge even more difficult. Furthermore, participants can directly interfere with other groups, hindering their opponents. Because of that, this test is considered the most chaotic of the entire festival, practically a free-for-all battle among the students. Edward explains that the objective of the event is to encourage teamwork and test the students' ability to deal with unexpected situations. According to him, the best way to approach it is to imagine that they are exploring a dungeon full of dangers. Mike interrupts by saying that the most interesting part will be observing the spells of the strongest students in the academy, even though it is something that should remain secret. He also comments that in the clandestine bets 2 groups are among the favorites: the DOS group, led by WHT-Nal Lindor, and the new group, led by Julius Rienberg. Mike admits that he bet everything on WHT-Nal, while Edward tries to make him stay silent to continue presenting the event. Soon after, all the teams are introduced. Among them is Group 6, considered the least popular. Many find it strange to see Sion, who is one of the candidates for victory, forming a team with someone like Will. Some spectators begin to laugh and mock, saying that someone without magic should not participate in such an event. Meanwhile, the teams positioned in the desert zone prepare to begin the test. Professor Warner is responsible for guiding and supervising the students in that area. He is surprised when he realizes that Will is among the participants. Warner complains, saying that the boy should not be there, and reminds him that he has already warned him several times about it. Even so, Will faces him with great determination. He replies that he knows many people mock him, but even so he needs to win that competition, no matter the cost. Warner tries to stop Will from continuing, but it is clear that he does not intend to give up. Colette apologizes to the professor, explaining that Will is extremely determined and rarely backs down once he makes a decision. Soon, the long-awaited event finally begins. Julius's team quickly advances across the field until they encounter large steel boxes scattered along the path. Suddenly, these boxes transform into numerous golems, creating a massive obstacle for the participants. Will runs straight toward them, and many people in the stadium begin calling him an idiot. To the spectators, facing all those golems alone seems practically like suicide. But at the moment Will prepares to attack, Colette uses her magic and creates a magical gauntlet for him. With that, the power of Will's strike increases greatly, allowing him to execute several strong attacks in sequence. The result is impressive. The blows completely destroy the golem that stood before them, leaving the audience completely surprised. Many would never have imagined seeing Will fighting at that level. The strategy is simple. Although he does not possess his own magic, he can use magical equipment, like the gauntlet created by Colette. In that way, he continues to follow the rules of the competition. Meanwhile, Sion becomes lost in thought. He remembers the battle in which Will saved him from the Devil Sentinel, something that still deeply bothers him. For Sion, it was humiliating to be saved by someone he considers inferior. After that episode, he tried to become stronger to erase that shame, but now Will manages to take the lead in the race. The objective of the test is to reach the crown located at the center of the field first, and Will's group is ahead as they enter the desert zone. Suddenly, other iron boxes appear, different from the previous ones. They rise quickly into the air and begin launching magical projectiles at the students on the ground. Will reacts immediately. He strikes the ground with force and, using the impact of the blow, creates a large barrier of sand and earth that blocks the projectiles. After that, he runs toward the flying boxes. Colette conjures several steel swords, and Will takes advantage of that to throw them with precision, destroying all the boxes in the air. In the event commentary, Mike shows surprise at how the group is dominating that area of the field with such ease. Some spectators, however, claim that all of this is only possible thanks to Colette's powerful magic. In part that is true, but other observers are impressed when they realize how Will can detect traps and deactivate them quickly. While commenting on this, Edward explains that it is natural for someone who spends so much time exploring dungeons. According to him, Will's efficiency comes from the experience he gained in those places, as well as his fast reflexes and the knowledge he has accumulated. Among the crowd, Iris cheers excitedly and begins shouting, rooting for Will with great enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Julius continues eliminating several opposing teams without mercy, being as ruthless as he has always been in previous festivals. Even so, Group 6 continues to lead the competition. Julius notices that something strange is happening when he begins to hear a great commotion coming from the stadium. Curious, he asks his companions what is happening on the field. They use a search magic to check the situation. As they analyze the field, they realize that Group 6, where Will is leading the race with a large advantage. One of his teammates comments that if they continue underestimating the others, they might end up losing. Julius simply laughs at the idea. He freezes everything around him while stating that it will never happen, because he will not allow anyone to defeat him. Meanwhile, Group 6 finally reaches the last zone, an enchanted forest. As soon as they enter the place, several magical circles appear around them. Will immediately realizes that it is a circular trap. Without hesitating, he begins to deactivate the magical circles, causing them to collide with each other and destroy themselves. He resolves the situation in just a few seconds. Mike then asks Edward what he thinks about that, since it was Edward himself who created those traps. Edward simply ignores the question and makes a sarcastic remark. Meanwhile, Will continues running toward the objective. However, he knows that inside the forest is where the real battle against the other teams will take place. If they want to finish quickly, they will need to go around the edge of the forest, prepare an ambush, and find a position to face Julius's team. But at the moment they try to hide, Julius suddenly appears and launches an attack with his ice magic, nearly hitting Will. Colette is surprised to realize that they arrived there much earlier than expected. Will also finds it strange, since it seemed impossible that Julius had surpassed the speed strategy created by Colette. While analyzing the situation, Will begins to think about all the possible forms of attack from the enemy. Julius takes advantage of the opportunity and launches a long-range ice attack, destroying several parts of the terrain. Will realizes that they will not be able to run forever and decides that they will have to face him. But at that moment Sion intervenes, releasing a huge amount of fire magic and conjuring a powerful spell. Colette shouts for Will to get out of the way. Sion fires his attack with full force. Luckily, Will manages to quickly raise a barrier of earth, blocking the blow. Even so, he is confused when he realizes that Sion attacked him. Colette asks why he is attacking Will instead of facing Julius. Sion replies that he has already done enough to ensure that his team advances, and that now he wants to settle something personal. For him, the moment has come to face Will in a direct duel. Will tries to say that this is not the time for that, but Sion does not listen. He begins launching several attacks, stating that he has waited a long time for that confrontation. At that instant, Julius also acts, creating a massive wall of ice that apparently ends up freezing Colette. Meanwhile, Sion continues advancing against Will. Will tries to convince him to stop, saying that they should not fight each other at that moment. But when he realizes that Sion has no intention of giving up, he draws his sword, preparing to fight. At that moment, a flashback appears. In the past, Will was always considered a useless student, someone with no talent at all. For Sion, that was unbearable to watch. One day, he even burned the mocking paper that had been placed on Will's back, and even offered him the chance to become one of his subordinates, so that he would not continue looking so pathetic. But Will simply ignored the offer and walked away. That attitude left the young Sion extremely irritated. He ran after Will, saying that he was not someone who should be ignored. Will only asked him to leave him alone and kept walking. Sion stood there watching from afar, feeling that to Will he was not even worthy of attention. From that day on, Sion decided that he would hate Will for the rest of his life. Back in the present, the confrontation finally becomes inevitable. Sion begins to attack with several fireballs, along with whip-like strikes made of flames. Will does his best to dodge and cut through the attacks, trying to keep his distance. The red-haired girl then shouts for him to stop just running away and face the fight for real. Otherwise, she promises that soon she will turn him into nothing but ashes. Will responds by saying that he cannot keep fighting like that. They are part of the same team and, besides, they do not have time to settle that there. He also reminds that he made a promise to the dwarves of the city, and he does not intend to break it. Even so, Sion continues advancing with aggressive attacks. While dodging the flames and the strikes, Will begins to wonder if he will really be forced to face him at that moment. Meanwhile, in the event commentary area, Mike explains to the audience that the situation of Squad 6 has taken a completely unexpected turn. After overcoming all the previous challenges with ease, two members of the group have started fighting each other, creating an intense confrontation. In the stands, Rosti and Warner watch with concern, because Will's dream depends directly on what happens in this magic festival. Mike then asks Edward what his opinion is about what is happening. Edward responds with an almost amused smile, saying that a fight between members of the same team is something truly unusual. For him, it does not matter what the reason is. Even if they manage to reach the crown and win the event, the tower's recruiters will probably not be impressed by it. To the observers, that situation only makes the group look disgraceful. Mike is startled by the comment, but he notices that Edward seems very satisfied with what is happening. Meanwhile, the recruiters observe the scene with a certain disappointment. Until a few minutes ago, the group had been advancing brilliantly across the field. Even so, someone comments that Will still has enough credits to be among the top 4, but that problem will certainly be resolved that day. Deep down, for them, Will is still just a boy. Meanwhile, Rosti continues to worry. He pets Kiki, thinking about what might happen to Will. Suddenly, Iris sits beside him and begins to cheer excitedly for Will. Rosti finds that strange because he did not expect her to be supporting Will. On the contrary, he imagined she was the type of person who preferred to support the more popular students, especially someone like Sion. Iris explains that, at first, Will did not attract much of her attention. However, someone talked about him, and since then she began to take interest. Now she is so excited that she even bought a small dagger-shaped keychain similar to the one Rosti uses, just to show her support. Rosti feels happy upon hearing that. After all, no one admires Will more than he does, as his roommate. Meanwhile, in another part of the field, Colette manages to escape from the explosion caused earlier. She continues dodging Julius's attacks, trying to return to help the two who are still fighting. Julius then provokes Colette, saying that she should stop running away or she might lose the title of Princess of the Earth. Colette immediately becomes irritated and warns him never to call her that again. She tries to escape once more, but Julius continues attacking. In the end, he manages to trap her in a snare and summons a purple lightning strike, attempting to finish her. Meanwhile, several students watch the event through observation spheres spread across the academy. They become confused when they notice that Julius appears in several different areas at the same time. Soon they understand what is happening. Julius is using an advanced cloning magic technique inspired by the abilities of the Magia Vander, creating copies of himself to delay all the participants. Mike celebrates excitedly when he sees Whitnell destroying one of those copies. However, his excitement has nothing to do with academic pride. In truth, he bet all his savings that Whitnell would win the festival. At another point in the academy, at the top of one of the towers, stand Philvis, Chalia, and Lafilla Farides, assistants of the Elven faction. Philvis says that he would like to leave, as he considers that festival extremely noisy and annoying. But Chalia responds that they cannot simply leave. After all, the event also exists to inform the inhabitants of paradise, and everything must be reported to Lady Eleanor. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Will continues dodging Sion's attacks. He begins to wonder why Sion seems so obsessed with him. Since childhood, Sion has always intimidated him and interrupted everything he tried to do. Will never understands the reason for that. He knows that many consider him a failure, but all he wants is for Sion to simply stop chasing him so that he can follow his path in peace. His objective is clear: to reach the tower and reunite with Elfaria. Sion continues attacking without stopping. Suddenly, he recites a powerful spell and summons a great gardener's falcon, a guardian formed from flames. Will is surprised when he realizes how much Sion has evolved in such a short time. Soon, the falcon dives toward him. Will leaps into the air and tries to cut its wings with his sword, planning to bring it down and then attack directly. But he notices something unexpected. The falcon's wings regenerate immediately. Then Will understands that, to defeat it, he will need to destroy the Guardian's magical core. At that moment, the falcon unleashes a massive burst of fire. Will blocks the blow using his magical gauntlet while thinking of a way to get closer. Unlike many Guardians, which only protect their summoners, that falcon attacks relentlessly. In the event commentary, Mike is completely impressed by the intensity of the battle. Even Edward seems surprised when he realizes how much Sion has evolved. To him, the boy is already above the level of an ordinary student. Among the observers, a man named Rod is also impressed to see someone so young using an advanced fire spell and still summoning a guardian with such precision. His assistant explains that this is Sion Ulter, heir of the Ulter House, a family famous for its fire magic. Rod comments that, although Sion has great potential, he is still slightly behind names like Lahana Owens and other students who are at the top of the ranking. Even so, he finds it interesting how Sion managed to evolve so quickly in a real combat situation. Because of that, he intends to inform Kariat that the new generation of mages promises to be very talented. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, both Will and Sion are already showing signs of exhaustion. Even so, Sion shouts that they need to keep fighting. He remembers that when Will faced the evil sentinel, he seemed much stronger than he is now. Tired, Will drives his sword into the ground and asks why they need to continue that meaningless fight. That irritates Sion even more. For him, there is a clear reason. After everything Will has done and all the anger he has felt for years, Will should feel at least a little resentment as well. Will responds calmly that Sion is probably right. For a long time, he really did despise him and thought he would like to retaliate for everything. But now he cannot waste time on that. He needs to face Julius. Upon hearing that, Sion becomes even more irritated. To him, Will's silent indifference hurts far more than any insult. Sion says that just seeing Will and hearing his words is enough to make him furious. The irritation is so great that he can barely control himself. What angers him the most is realizing that Will keeps moving forward and refuses to give up, even without possessing talent for magic. For Sion, that makes no sense. Despite everything, even without magical ability, Will continues to move forward and still has the courage to look at everyone around him. Everyone except him. With his eyes filled with tears, Sion asks Will to stop ignoring him. At least once in his life, he wants Will to truly look at him. Those words deeply surprise Will. The last thing he expected was to hear something like that from Sion. Even though Sion never directly asked for recognition, Will had also never thought about accepting him in that way. Deep down, Sion has always been extremely selfish. Even so, now he seemed to be asking for exactly what he had always wanted. Noticing this, Will grips his sword firmly. If he truly wants to be acknowledged by Sion, then he needs to face him with all of his strength. Sion feels satisfied when he realizes that he has finally received Will's attention. As he begins to recite the next spell, Will prepares himself carefully, waiting for the right moment to anticipate the movement and counterattack. Any mistake now could cost a very high price. Sion launches an extremely dangerous double attack. On one side he performs a powerful summoning, while on the other his guardian moves in to attack at the same time. Even so, Will has already understood the pattern of the battle. He manages to dodge every blow and advances quickly. In just a few movements, he cuts the magical core of the guardian and moves straight toward the red-haired boy. The two are about to decide the final battle. But at that exact instant, a massive rock appears between them. The stone was summoned by Colette. She appears in front of both of them, with her clothes almost completely burned. Will immediately asks where Julius is, but soon realizes that maybe he should first ask if she is all right. Colette replies that she managed to hit Julius directly in the face during the fight, but that right after that he simply disappeared. While Sion tries to understand what happened, he suddenly notices that Colette is practically without clothes because of the explosions. Desperate, he starts shouting for her to cover herself immediately, reminding her that she is the daughter of a noble house and should not appear in that manner in front of the entire audience. Annoyed, Colette replies that the truly indecent ones are the two of them, who started an absurd fight right in the middle of the festival. After that, she tells Will that he must go immediately after Julius. She herself will take care of Sion. But Sion refuses at the same moment. He states that no one is going to interfere in his path. Colette shouts back saying that, in fact, it is always him who gets in the way of everything. He always appears at the worst moment and ends up ruining the only chance that Will has to climb up to the tower. Suddenly, Will approaches and gently pats her on the head, thanking her for helping to save time. Colette turns completely red. Sion, irritated, asks if Will intends to ignore him once again. Meanwhile, in another part of the arena, the different group leaders have already reached the entrance point of the stadium after overcoming all the obstacles along the course. The group released by Julius is about to take the crown, and apparently there is no one there to stop them. But then something unexpected happens. Will appears running at high speed toward the stadium. In an impressive leap, he crosses the entrance and lands right behind Julius. The entire audience is surprised when they see that. Now Will finally prepares himself for the decisive confrontation against Julius. Meanwhile, somewhere else, we see Elfaria sitting calmly, sleeping. Her maid, Sarza, begins to scold her, saying that she spends all her time sleeping while watching the world from the top of the tower. Even while complaining, Sarza thinks to herself that all that appearance of holiness is just an act. To her, Elfaria is nothing more than someone who sells cheap magical items. Elfaria calmly asks what Sarza wants. Then Sarza shows some documents containing the names of the candidates selected by the recruiters. Among all of them, the one who drew the most attention was Julius Rain, who is causing a great impact during the magic festival. According to Sarza, Julius might even become Elfaria's successor in the future. Elfaria agrees calmly. If everything written in the documents is true, that possibility really exists. Back at the festival, Will finally approaches Julius. Julius seems satisfied that he made it that far. He says that it will be even better to win after humiliating Will in front of everyone. Will, however, states that he does not intend to lose. He even mentally apologizes to Donan and to the dwarves from the restaurant, in case something goes wrong. Julius responds with contempt, calling Will nothing more than a useless library rat, someone with absolutely no talent at all. Right after that, he covers the entire arena with a thick curtain of smoke. Will immediately prepares himself to fight. Even without being able to see properly, he manages to hear the movements around him and realizes that Julius is trying to attack him from the sides. He dodges a block of ice that suddenly appears. Even without seeing him, he is still able to locate Julius's position. But at the exact moment he is about to counterattack, another strike hits him unexpectedly. Julius asks if Will truly believes he can keep up with his movements. Then he reveals something surprising. He did not move even a single step. The audience is shocked when they realize that there are several Julius fighting at the same time. Will is also impressed when he understands what is happening. Julius is using clones. The copies begin to explode around Will, trapping him in a deadly trap. The commentator Mike becomes completely confused. unable to understand what is happening in the arena. Meanwhile, Evil Snake watches everything in amazement. He explains that Julius is using a secret art created by Elfaria Alvisvina, known as Glass Fro, a set of 12 extremely powerful spells. These 12 spells are considered Elfaria's greatest masterpiece, and Julius is using the first one among them, the spell called Ars Un, capable of creating perfect ice copies of its user. Will asks how Julius managed to learn a magic created by Elfaria. Julius begins to laugh. With his usual narcissistic expression, he replies that it is simply natural talent and that he learned everything by studying magic on his own. Even if it is still only partial, this already places him close to the level of a true tower mage. Julius continues provoking Will, saying that one day he himself will surpass Elfaria. Those words make Will furious. He charges forward to attack immediately, but Julius was already expecting exactly that. Using his clones, he surrounds Will with an unrelenting sequence of attacks. Soon after, 3 clones join together to form a large barrier, creating a kind of ice cage around him. Julius says that it suits someone like Will perfectly, since he is nothing more than a wild animal. Throughout the entire Colosseum, everyone holds their breath as they watch the enormous block of ice closing in on Will. Mike shouts excitedly, saying that it is incredible. Edward comments coldly that Julius won without even needing to take a single step. For him, that represents exactly what it means to be a true mage. Even so, Julius still does not seem satisfied. He uses acoustic magic to amplify his voice and asks the recruiters what they thought of the spectacle. Then he declares before everyone that his ice magic, inherited from Albis, is superior, and that he will prove himself to be the true successor of Elfaria. The students are shocked when they realize that Julius is capable of using Elfaria's magic. Meanwhile, Iris watches everything in silence. She realizes that Julius arranged all of that just to show off in front of the audience. He deceived Will and carefully prepared the entire situation. But Iris also realizes something else. If Julius does not win now, that entire display might end up turning into a massive humiliation in front of everyone. At that moment, the enormous block of ice begins to crack and soon shatters completely. From within the fragments, Will emerges, standing, as if nothing had happened. He comments that he needs to thank Julius, since the ice magic ended up helping to cool his head. Normally, he loses a bit of control when something involves Elfie. Julius becomes furious upon hearing that. Shouting, he declares that now he will humiliate him in front of everyone. However, Will acts so naturally that it seems like he is not even taking the fight seriously. Julius launches an immediate attack. However, in an extremely fast movement, Will takes advantage of the trajectory of the projectiles and appears behind Julius's 2 allies. With precise strikes, he defeats them instantly, sending both of them to the ground. Meanwhile, he comments that the Rs used by Julius is still incomplete. In the stands, Edward watches the scene irritated, remembering that Will had already used that exact same strategy against him before. The entire Colosseum audience is shocked. No one expected Will to eliminate 2 such strong opponents so easily. At the same time, Julius's clones begin to disappear one after another. The students are completely confused, trying to understand what is happening. Will explains that he managed to interrupt the control of the clones by using Julius's own teammates as a distraction. The magic that Julius uses can only be maintained for a short time, and with his current talent he is still very far from reaching Elfaria, his beloved white-haired mage. Julius is shocked when he realizes that Will understands magic better than he does. Then, Will reveals that he grew up with Yuya in the same orphanage and studied her magic out of admiration. He acknowledges Julius's talent for being able to reproduce that technique, but explains that the spell he used was created by Elfaria when she was only 2 years old and still had many flaws. Shaken and furious, Julius creates 8 clones at once to win through sheer numbers. However, Will remembers that Elfaria used to fight him using 10 clones when they were children. Calmly, he dodges the attacks and destroys all the clones, defeating Julius with a final blow. The Colosseum falls silent for a few seconds before erupting in shock and admiration. Even without magic, Will defeated a powerful genius. In the stands, Iris celebrates the victory. After Will's impressive victory over Julius, everyone believes that he will win the tournament. However, while the others were fighting, Whitnell suddenly appears, grabs the crown, and wins the game, leaving the entire Colosseum in shock, especially Will, who is completely stunned. Whitnell's team is declared the winner at the tower. Elfaria then talks with Sarza and asks if there is any magic capable of going back in time or erasing memories. The question arises because Elfaria discovers that Will believed she used clones only to provoke him when they were children, when in reality she only wanted to spend more time with him. After the festival, Sion is still irritated that Will defeated Julius and promises to surpass him one day. Later, Will and his friends celebrate at the restaurant of the Ains family for having fulfilled a promise. Even without winning the tournament, Julius appears at the place humiliated, helping to wash dishes. After his defeat, Warner comments that, after the festival, Will's life will probably change. In fact, a few days later, at the academy, Will becomes very popular. Many students want to form teams with him for dungeon exploration training, even arguing among themselves because of it. Colette becomes irritated, since many of those students previously despised Will, and now only want to take advantage of his strength. Despite that, Will feels happy about the popularity, since he has always been very lonely. Colette then invites him to explore the dungeon with her, but ends up turning the invitation into a shopping trip, which leaves her extremely embarrassed. Later, on the next day, when they are about to go out together, Rust appears saying that he will also accompany them during the outing. He behaves in a strangely intimate way with Will, holding his hand, adjusting his clothes, and staying between the two the entire time, which makes Colette increasingly frustrated. Suspicious, she asks who Rusty really is, and even suspects that he might be a girl, since he is too handsome. However, Will states with complete certainty that Rusty is a boy, explaining that they have already bathed together several times, something that leaves Colette completely surprised. Rusty returns with drinks and jokes that he can drink from Will's cup, which irritates Colette. Soon after, he suggests that Will take his swords for maintenance. When Will steps away, Colette confronts Rust and asks what he wants with Will. Rust responds directly that no one loves Will more than he does and claims that Will also likes him the most. The two begin a rivalry, arguing about who is closer to Will. Meanwhile, Will meets Lahanna, who invites him to talk. In a tea house, he discovers that some of the strongest students in the academy are gathered. Lahanna reveals that she wants to form a special group for the upcoming dungeon training and invites Will because of his experience and performance at the festival. Julius and Sion initially reject the idea, but Whitnell defends Will, reminding them that he has already defeated powerful mages with his sword. In the end, everyone accepts Lahanna's proposal. She explains that she wants to climb higher and higher in the tower and gain great recognition. Since her family, the Owens family, has a short lifespan and carries great pressure for significant achievements, the group then agrees to work together. Later, Warner officially announces the beginning of dungeon training. The students must explore for a week, facing dangerous monsters to earn credits. Edward also warns that the risk of death is real. When the training begins, the students arrive at the base camp on the 6th floor. Colette insists on accompanying Will in Lahanna's group. Rust, however, needs to remain at the camp due to his duties. Meanwhile, mysterious figures outside the dungeon discuss dangerous matters, including a possible failure in the barrier that protects the world. Inside the dungeon, Will's group faces an army of crimson monsters. Will prepares to protect the mages, but discovers that Lahanna is an exception among them. Descended from knights, she masters close combat. With great skill, she quickly defeats all the monsters and explains that the group should prioritize advancing quickly rather than competing for credits among themselves. In the dungeon, Will remembers that the most important magic in that place is enemy detection. Since he cannot use magic, he does not have that ability and ends up being seen as a burden by the group. While the others defeat monsters easily with magic, Will can barely act and ends up only carrying bodies to earn credit. Even so, he decides to keep trying to help. After a long advance, the group takes a break. Whitnell creates an illusion barrier to keep monsters away and, during the rest, shows disdain for Will, stating that only elves can touch those they consider worthy. Colette becomes irritated, but Will tries to avoid conflict, explaining that this is part of elven culture. Lahanna then reveals the group's true objective: to find and defeat Lumino's Navarros, a rare creature worth about 110 credits. She believes that, working together, they can defeat the guardian of that floor and prove their capability to the tower. As they advance through the dungeon, the group finds several monsters dead along the way, all defeated purely by physical strength, with no signs of magic. As they get closer, they discover something even stranger. Navarros itself is already dead, apparently recently defeated by someone unknown. Suspicious, Will remembers that detection magic is not perfect and decides to trust his own senses. He senses danger above them and tries to warn the group, but the monster suddenly appears and attacks Wall, destroying the ground and causing everyone to fall into a deep cavern. Will saves Itnal during the fall, but the two end up separated from the rest of the group. They discover that they have fallen to the 11th floor of the dungeon, an extremely dangerous area known as the Jaws of Nightmare, where only very powerful mages usually enter. Meanwhile, Lahanna's group realizes that they are lost at that deadly level. Separated, everyone is at risk of dying if they do not reunite quickly. In another part of the cave, Itnal faints and dreams of voices of elves, saying that he is useless and without talent. However, when he wakes up, he finds beside him the enormous monster already dead and realizes that Will probably defeated it alone. After defeating the monster, Will tries to treat Whitnell's injuries, but the elf refuses to be touched and decides to treat himself. During the fall, almost all the equipment was lost, leaving only a few secondary weapons and limited supplies, enough to survive for about 2 days. Whitnell believes that the best option would be to wait for rescue, but Will insists that they need to find the others before it is too late. Meanwhile, outside, Warner discovers that something very serious has happened in the dungeon. A monster stampede destroyed one of the camps and killed teachers, in addition to destroying the control devices. Edward then orders the immediate cancellation of the training, suspecting that everything was planned. Inside the dungeon, Will and Whitnell continue advancing. Even without detection magic, Will uses his experience and senses to perceive dangers. Soon, they are surrounded by demonic boars, but Will defeats the monsters with ease, surprising Whitnell. He also explains that these enemies are blind and rely on smell. Because of that, Whitnell's illusions do not work on them. Gradually, Whitnell begins to realize that Will is far more skilled than he had imagined. However, he reveals his frustration. He believes he has no talent and considers himself a failure among the elves, since he cannot materialize his illusions like others of his race. In a flashback, we see that he always tried to reach the level of his adoptive sister, Eleanor, a powerful elven mage, but never managed to do so. Meanwhile, Lahanna explains to Colette that many students who remain at the academy are seen as mages who have not yet managed to prove their true talent, especially when compared to prodigies like Elf. Back in the cave, Whitnell admits that he often mocks others just to hide his own insecurity. He even asks Will to abandon him, believing that he is only holding him back. However, Will refuses. He states that Whitnell is an incredible elf and promises to protect him until he is able to stand on his own again. As they advance, Will continues defeating increasingly stronger monsters to protect Whitnell. Impressed by Will's endurance and determination, Whitnell begins to question why he keeps fighting to save him instead of simply leaving him behind. Will senses that something dangerous is approaching. Soon, several Balkars appear, flaming creatures extremely resistant to physical attacks and common magic. The only magic truly effective against them is the illusion magic of the elves. Will asks Whitnell for help, but he believes his magic is incomplete and useless. Even so, Will encourages him, saying that making mistakes is part of learning, and that they both share the same dream of reaching the tower where Elf is. During the fight, Will cannot defeat the monsters alone and continues insisting that Whitnell believe in himself. Will's words finally reach him, and he decides not to betray that trust. He overcomes his doubts and manages to materialize his illusions for the first time, creating a massive barrier of trees that blocks the monsters. Recognizing Will's value, Whitnell kneels and apologizes for having despised him. Admitting that he is a true warrior, the two then reconcile. After that, Will uses a magic carpet created by Rust, which, with a few drops of his blood, reveals a map to locate their companions. With the help of Kik, who recognizes the scent of Colette and Sion, they decide to search for the rest of the group. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, Julius and Sion face a large horde of evil sentinels. Sion fights with fury, still irritated by his defeat to Will. On the upper floors, monsters also invade the students' camps, causing panic. At that moment, Snape appears and quickly eliminates the creatures, helping the students escape. Afterward, he informs that almost everyone managed to flee, but Lahanna's group is still missing on the 11th floor. Meanwhile, Colette and Lahanna continue lost in the dungeon, marking their path with crystals and almost out of supplies. Lahanna blames herself for putting everyone in danger because of her ambition, but Colette consoles her. Later, Will and Whitnell find Sion and Julius, surrounded by the bodies of defeated monsters. However, shortly afterward, they all come across a terrifying scene. A headless man, carrying the head of a teacher, appears before them. At the same time, Colette and Lahanna encounter the same enemy, accompanied by a hooded figure named Marcy. The pair realizes that something far more dangerous is happening inside the dungeon. Two mysterious enemies reveal that their goal is to destroy the false sky, the great barrier that protects the world. The headless man tries to attack Colette and Lahanna, but Will arrives in time, guided by Kik's sense of smell and the crystals left by Colette. Even so, he is easily thrown aside by the enemy. Before leaving, Marcy calls him, and the man summons a powerful monster, an evil Grand Duke. Using the ancient portal magic of the Magic Queen, the creature, extremely powerful and equivalent to hundreds of thousands of magical power points, attacks the group. The students try to flee, but realize that escaping will be nearly impossible. Will then proposes a plan: defeat the Grand Duke, since eliminating the leader would cause the other monsters to lose their organization. Even thinking it is impossible, his companions decide to trust him, and Lahanna recognizes him as the leader. During the battle, Julius uses clones to distract the monster while preparing a powerful spell based on Elf's continuous casting technique. The attack only delays the enemy, and Lahanna tries to finish it, but is stopped by a barrier. The group falls into despair, and Will, overcome by fear after breaking the glasses that Elf gave him, almost loses his courage. But he rises again and returns to the fight. With the help of Colette, who creates a stone sword, Will manages to cut one of the Grand Duke's wings. Sion also attacks with powerful magic, but the monster remains almost intact. Then, Will remembers the connection between sword and wand and asks Sion to channel his magic through the blade. The sword becomes engulfed in intense flames and releases enormous power. With a single devastating strike, Will cuts the Grand Duke in half, defeating the creature. However, he loses all his strength right afterward. Before they can recover, a massive horde of monsters surrounds the group, and everything seems lost. At that moment, a powerful light appears and instantly destroys all the creatures. When the figure responsible reveals his face, everyone is shocked. It is Aeon Mysterious Oldekin, the sovereign of light and king of magic, wielder of the most powerful wand. Will wonders what he is doing in that place. It seems that Aeon and his exploration team were in the dungeon, possibly returning from some mission. Aeon then declares that those who face the darkness of the dungeon will be blessed by the light, and congratulates the boys for the courage they showed during the battle. Everyone becomes emotional and kneels before him. Even the elves tremble with admiration in the presence of someone so powerful. While everyone shows respect to the great sovereign, Will continues staring at him. One of Aeon's companions approaches Will and comments that his sword is still alive. He asks Will's name. Will responds, still somewhat hypnotized by the situation, and then asks, "Who is that person?" The figure removes the hood and reveals his identity. It is Finn. His presence there is surprising, since no one expected to find him in that place. Meanwhile, in another part of the dungeon, two evil mages celebrate. They have finally obtained the material they were looking for. According to them, if they had not been attacked earlier, they might also have obtained that sword. Even so, they believe that the most important thing is that they completed their mission. Now they intend to celebrate. The training ends in a tragic and unexpected way. 11 Academy professors die. although no student loses their life, while the school begins an investigation to discover who caused the incident. The surviving students recover in the infirmary, still shaken. They recognize that they survived thanks to the intervention of the Sovereign of Light and their teamwork. During the conversation, Lehana realizes that the group has become a true team after the experience in the dungeon. The tense atmosphere eases, with jokes about her enormous appetite, caused by the high energy consumption of her magic. Then, the others comment on the moment when Will absorbed everyone's magic during the battle. Not even he can explain exactly what happened, which increases the mystery surrounding his power. Will also remembers a boy who participated in the rescue. Lehana explains that he probably belongs to the FM tribe, a race that does not use magic but possesses great knowledge about the dungeon and has acted as guides to the tower since the time of the Wise Queen. Later, Finn meets Calderon and delivers a fragment of the sword known as the Magic Slayer, found in confrontations deep within the dungeon. He suspects that someone is conducting experiments there, using dungeon materials to create that weapon. While discussing the investigation, Finn questions why Calderon did not tell Will anything, but she replies that he is still just a student who wishes to become a great mage. The next day, even after everything that happened, Will is already training again. Sion challenges him to a duel to fulfill an old promise, and the two begin to fight in the school courtyard until they are interrupted by Warner. As the months pass, the students continue their studies, and the school year comes to an end with the final exams. Despite everything he has faced, Will keeps his goal clear, to keep moving forward until he meets Elf again. After some time, the boys return to the dungeon, and, this time, acting in a more organized way as a team, they finally manage to defeat the boss monster Nevirus. Time moves forward normally, and Will remains completely determined to achieve a perfect score, as this is essential to advance in the tower and finally reach Elfie. Later, as the exam period comes to an end, several teachers are surprised, since Will Serfort becomes the only student to achieve a maximum score on all exams. Not even Lehana, known for her excellence, managed to avoid a few mistakes throughout the evaluations. Even so, Will maintained a flawless performance in every test taken. Warner, on the other hand, shows great enthusiasm, and Professor Alyssa approaches to congratulate him, highlighting that all his effort is finally bringing results and bringing him closer to his goal. Meanwhile, Julio and Sayo are gathered with the principal, who congratulates them for the impressive achievement of defeating a floor guardian, even with such an intense routine. However, upon receiving his wand, Julio states that he only participated because he already had his position guaranteed in the tower, without the need to defeat Nevirus. At that moment, Sion provokes him, saying that even if Julio had not been present, his absence would hardly have been noticed, since his powerful ice disappeared quickly, making his participation irrelevant. Annoyed, Julio fires back, reminding him that Sion spent the entire time hiding behind the insect just throwing fireballs. As usual, the two end up arguing, while the principal comments that it is clear that both are worried about Will, which only increases the irritation between them even more. Meanwhile, Will continues studying intensely and practically without rest. He spends days without eating properly or sleeping, refusing to slow down, because he believes that even a single point can completely change his future. Colette tries to convince him to take a break, but Will insists that, thanks to the help of Lehana and the others, he managed to achieve the maximum score in the stages, so he feels that he needs to keep striving so as not to waste everything they did for him. Rosti reminds him that Will has also already accumulated credits in spellcasting after defeating Professor Edward, but Will replies that he is still missing 1 point and that he needs to secure it no matter what. At that moment, Rosti pulls out one of his gray hairs, warning that if he continues like this, many more will appear. Colette gets irritated and questions what he thinks he is doing, while Rosti responds provocatively, saying that he only did something that she herself had always wanted to do. Colette is left speechless, visibly embarrassed, which makes Rosti come out as the winner in this small exchange. At another moment, Lehana comments to Wignall that, after defeating Nevirus, they will finally be able to climb the tower with pride. However, Wignall observes that it was not that simple, since afterward they still faced a Grand Duke, As they continue walking, he notices how much Lihanna has changed, stating that she no longer gives off that same tension as before. Lihanna agrees, recalling that she used to hide her feelings behind a smile. But deep down she never let her guard down. Wignall then admits that this change happened thanks to Will, as he was the one who showed her that even someone strong can make mistakes, and that ended up earning her respect. Lihanna also acknowledges that she learned a lot from Will, and that she now understands that cowardice can come from a feeling of inferiority, but it can also transform into courage. The two then wonder what Will might be doing at that moment, and Wignall answers that it is obvious. He is probably in the library, completely focused on his studies. Later, during the night, Colette, worried, decides to bring something for Will to eat, since he spent the entire day in the library. When she arrives there, she realizes that he ended up falling asleep from exhaustion. Taking advantage of the moment, she covers him with a blanket and confirms that he is indeed sleeping. Without missing the opportunity, she leans in, trying to give him a kiss. But Rosti suddenly appears and interrupts her. Surprised, Colette tries to justify herself, saying that it was not what it looked like and that she was just adjusting his clothes. However, Rosti does not believe her and states that he will not let anyone steal a kiss like that. Colette, trying to disguise it, says that she was just worried about Will, since even exhausted, he continues to push himself too hard, which could end up causing serious damage to him. She confesses that she does not like the way Will keeps chasing Albis Vina, as if he were bound to her, while she just waits at the top of the tower without doing anything. Deep down, Colette admits that she feels sorry for him, and Rosti agrees that he thinks the same way. Meanwhile, at the top of the tower, Faria meets Eleanor and comments that it is rare to see her outside her room, since she is usually quite lazy. Eliana responds by asking if Faria is still bothered by having lost the fight against her. In response, Eleanor states that she only lost because she was forced to use ice magic, and that if she had used other elements, she would have come out victorious. At that moment, Zio appears and asks both of them to lower their voices and move aside, as he is passing through. Faria questions what he is doing there, and Zio replies that it should be obvious, suggesting that she also came for the same reason. He explains that the moment is approaching, and that everyone needs to start preparing for the ritual. Since the barrier is about to disappear, the news leaves him completely shaken. Time passes, and in a garden, Rosti meets him to return his glasses, now repaired. During the conversation, Will shows frustration, saying that it was obvious he would not be able to answer that question. He feels defeated, believing that because of that, he will not be able to fulfill his promise. Rosti hugs him and says that no words will be enough to ease his pain, but assures him that he will stand by his side, no matter what happens. Meanwhile, the principal gathers with Wignall and Lihanna, asking if they managed to find Will, but they answer that they did not. Julio appears criticizing the search for Will, calling him a coward for having run away and saying that students who do not evolve end up leaving the academy. Wignall confronts him and demands respect, but Julio insists that in that place only magic matters, stating that someone who fights with a sword does not belong there. Sion admits that he cannot stand Will and reveals his frustration for not being the one who defeated him. Shortly after, Warner appears and decides to take over the search for Will, suggesting that the others take advantage of the Terminalia period. Meanwhile, the end-of-year celebrations begin. Claire leads the event with humor, hiding her frustration over absent friends, and recalls the story of Mercedes, who 500 years ago led mages to seal the sky and protect the world. Since the barrier needs to be renewed annually, the mages perform a collective ritual at the turn of the year, successfully recreating it. However, soon after the celebrations begin, a strange message appears in the sky and everything changes. The environment darkens, portals open, and demonic creatures invade Regarden. Those responsible for the attack reveal that they took advantage of the moment when the mages were weakened after the ritual to begin a massive massacre. By looking closely ahead, Will realizes that what he is seeing is not something ordinary, but rather magical portal circles, exactly like the ones they had previously seen on the 11th floor of the dungeon. The resemblance is undeniable, and this immediately puts him on alert. as he knows very well the danger that these structures represent and the kind of threat they can bring. Meanwhile, in the city, chaos has already taken over everything, with various different monsters appearing and attacking without any warning or apparent pattern. The streets, once busy, are now filled with panic, and people, completely desperate, begin to question the reason why creatures from the depths of the dungeons are now on the surface, something that should never happen under normal circumstances or under any known control. The scene then cuts to Claire Sarah, who, maintaining her calm even in the face of the critical situation and the despair around her, decides to act quickly and casts her defensive barriers without hesitation. As she conjures some magical bubbles around, something unexpected happens. From within them, guardians emerge, summoned creatures that possess the ability to drain the strength of enemies efficiently. At the same time, the faction's mages begin to chant their spells with precision and synchrony, showing complete mastery of their techniques. With this combination of well-coordinated strategies, they manage to eliminate the monsters with extreme ease, which leaves everyone around completely impressed with the power and efficiency of the capital's mages. These mages are known as the Tower Mages, figures respected and feared for their skill and discipline. They quickly come to a consensus that they need to discover the origin of these magical circles. As this is clearly not a natural event, for them, it is clear that someone is behind the release of these creatures, and they demand that those responsible be captured, no matter the cost. However, when they turn their attention back to the battlefield, they notice something disturbing and unexpected. One of the monsters managed to survive all the simultaneous attacks that should have completely eliminated it, even after a new sequence of blows is launched against it. They initially believe that the enemy has been defeated, but soon realize they were mistaken when they see that it is still moving. Everyone begins to attack together, trying to eliminate the threat once and for all without leaving any openings. Claire then shouts for one of the men to retreat immediately, but it is already too late, and he ends up being brutally cut in half in front of everyone. At that moment, Claire realizes something even more alarming and concerning. Magic simply is not working on these monsters, making the entire strategy useless. When she is attacked, she manages to identify the cause. The sword used by the enemy is a Mage Slayer, a weapon created specifically to nullify and pierce magical defenses, something extremely rare and dangerous. The scene then shifts to the school's headmistress, who receives the news that almost all of the tower mages have been killed, in addition to there being numerous civilian casualties. She begins to reflect deeply on the situation, questioning whether this weapon was produced on a large scale for combat and what the true objective of the enemies behind all of this might be. Despite the urgency of the situation, when they suggest that the Academy send reinforcements to the city, she immediately refuses without hesitation. For her, all of this is nothing more than a carefully planned distraction to divert attention from the true target. Her focus is clear and unwavering. The tower must be defended at any cost. The mages present understand that they are the true targets and that they must act quickly before it is too late. The only viable option is to deploy the Grand Barrier, but there is a critical problem. Elfaria's mana is practically exhausted, as is that of everyone else. This is the only day of the year when all mages end up completely drained, which makes the situation even more dangerous. Even without knowing exactly where this threat came from, everyone is certain that the enemies chose this moment on purpose, aiming to eliminate them all at once while they are vulnerable. One of the men suggests that it would be better to retreat to preserve their lives, but an old man harshly reprimands him, reminding him that he lost his eyes and, therefore, has no right to speak of retreat or weakness. He then forbids any mage from leaving the tower under any circumstances. If a single wand falls and the Grand Barrier is destroyed, the celestial invaders will be able to enter, and not only Regarden, but the entire world will be reduced to ashes. This is something they cannot allow under any circumstances. The scene changes again, now showing those responsible for the attack, visibly irritated by the fact that the tower mages did not appear as expected. They had prepared carefully planned bait to lure them all, with the intention of eliminating them in a single strike. Faced with the failure of this initial plan, they decide to proceed with what they currently have available, without retreating. Back in the capital, a mother and her daughter are cornered by monsters, with no apparent chance of escape. At the moment when everything seemed lost and inevitable, Will appears to save them, cutting off the arm of one of the creatures with a precise and swift strike. Even the enemies are surprised by the strength demonstrated by the boy. A brief glimpse of his past reveals that he never understood why people despise those who use swords. But despite the resentment he carries within himself, he has never allowed it to consume him completely. Determined, he moves forward without hesitation and defeats several enemies with ease. One of the girls observes that, although Will is capable of facing mages with his sword, he cannot handle everything alone in the face of a threat of this scale. Given this, the royal mage decides to allow the dwarves to enter the battle to balance the situation. Will's master then kneels before them, humbly asking for their help and support. Even though they are reluctant at first, the dwarves eventually accept, mainly out of respect for Will and what he represents. Meanwhile, Will's friends face enormous difficulties just to survive. Even while using illusion magic, the monsters are able to block everything with ease, as if they were already prepared. One of the girls suggests that they should simply distract the enemies while the dwarves approach silently. Following this strategy, they reinforce their shields and use Colette's power to bring down the saint's statue onto one of the monsters, finally managing to deal significant damage. Giulio goes into shock upon seeing that, because destroying the statue could attract the wrath of the deities and bring even worse consequences. The tower mages become irritated when they realize they need to rely on the dwarves to win, and some of them do not even accept this idea, even in the face of necessity. The infiltrated mages, on the other hand, understand that the situation has completely spiraled out of control, with the dwarves on the battlefield and the lack of proper weapons to deal with them. They decide to use their last card, something they had been saving for the most critical moment. Suddenly, a portal opens in front of Will, who is left in shock upon seeing the creature that slowly emerges from it. The beast advances immediately, giving no chance to react, launching him away with a single blow and knocking him unconscious from the impact. The scene shifts to Finn, who confronts one of the remaining enemies, demanding answers about the origin of the monsters and the plan behind all of this. The man claims that it is already too late to stop anything, and reveals that the plan was to take him to the depths of the dungeon. However, before he can reveal more details, he ends up being killed, leaving everything unresolved. Finn, in disbelief and frustration, refuses to accept that as the end of the answers. The scene returns to Will, who wakes up at the exact moment he is about to be hit, managing to dodge at the last second. He tries to understand where that creature came from and why it is so powerful. It is Vander, a monster known from the 40th floor, responsible for killing previous generations of mages. The enemies explain that they had to sacrifice 50 of their own men just to push this creature through the portal. Even so, they are satisfied, as they believe this will cause a great impact. Meanwhile, Will fights, but he cannot deal any damage and is constantly thrown around. He saves a comrade, but ends up being slammed violently against the ground. At that moment, the dwarves arrive to help him. After defeating several monsters, they realize too late that they have fallen into a trap. The creature begins to absorb the energy of all the defeated monsters, becoming even stronger. It even goes as far as devouring its own allies to increase its power further. Any attempt to approach is useless, as it creates a shield that repels everyone. With ease, it defeats several dwarves at once, leaving Will completely terrified. The enemies watch satisfied, since magic does not work against this creature. Will finally understands all the monsters were sacrificed to create that beast. A sea of blood begins to form, and he feels a huge weight for not being able to do anything. He knows he needs someone to enchant his sword, but any attack is easily blocked. Before his eyes, a friend's arm is cut off, which makes his anger grow even more. Even so, he moves forward, dodging and attacking, but without success. No knowledge or technique seems to work. Meanwhile, Rosti sends a cat to fetch Colette, promising to protect Will. He knows he does not have enough power to face that creature. At the moment when Will is about to be killed, Rusty suddenly appears, placing himself in front of him and pushing him away from the attack, stating that he will always be by his side. Upon seeing his friend die before his eyes, Will feels deep pain, and his anger reaches a new level in the face of everything that has happened. If you followed until here, comment Rusty to send that positive energy to him. I hope you enjoyed the content, and if you really liked it, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to follow more videos like this. Will continues plummeting at high speed, with the wind cutting across his face and the sensation of free fall taking over his entire body. For a brief moment, it seems that there is no more hope, but luckily, his teacher manages to reach him at the last moment and grabs him before the worst can happen, saving his life by a very small margin. Even after being rescued, Will cannot calm down and continues screaming desperately for his friend, as if refusing to accept the situation he is in. The scene then shifts to the group of the Magia Vander, where the atmosphere is tense and heavy. Zio looks around and becomes even more irritated with what is happening. Unable to accept the inaction of the others, Carriot notices his intention and asks where he is going. But Zio responds directly, saying that it should be obvious, since he is heading straight to the battlefield. In his view, everyone there is useless for fighting without achieving results. But those who remain still without doing absolutely anything are even worse. Carriot tries to bring reason to the situation, reminding that Lord Aaron has already made it clear that no one can leave there under any circumstances. He explains that if the Magia Vander are defeated, the Great Barrier will disappear completely, and without it there will be no chance of a future. The celestial invaders will destroy everything without exception, reducing the entire world to ashes. He also emphasizes that even they are at a disadvantage against those creatures, and that the only viable option is to wait until the most important person for everyone manages to recover. Because of that, he asks again for Zio to step back and sit down. Zio, however, does not accept that idea and questions whether Carriot really expects him to act calmly in the face of all that. He states that he would rather send everything to hell than continue there holding a weak wand without doing anything. Faced with that, Carriot decides to act and uses his firepower to prevent him from advancing, demanding that Zio return immediately. He makes it clear that if he does not obey, he will be forced to restrain him by force. The argument intensifies to the point that no one around dares to interfere. Those who still maintain awareness of the situation know that the Magia Vander cannot split up at such a critical moment. At that instant, Lady stands up, breaking the silence, and demands that the master withdraw his orders. He responds coldly, saying that Elfaria should not try to make him change his decision and orders her to sit down again. Even so, she ignores the order and decides to act on her own, determined to protect those she loves, including Will. Before leaving, she warns that if they try to stop her, she will not hesitate to attack as well. The scene returns to Will, who is now consumed by anger and frustration in the face of everything that is happening. The master analyzes the situation and understands that the arrival of Devander caused the complete collapse of the front line, while the surviving Dinnabaros continue pressing and forcing everyone to retreat. Not even the dwarves, known for their resilience, can contain the enemy advance. Faced with that, he believes that Will is the only remaining hope, but Will cannot accept that. He feels completely powerless, remembering how he has already gone through something similar in the past when Elfie was taken. For him, all of this happens because he cannot use magic like the others. Without that power, he feels that he is incapable of protecting anyone, whether Elfie, Rosti, or anyone else. In his mind, he sees himself as nothing more than a failure. Werkner tries to calm him down, speaking firmly, but Will keeps questioning himself, unable to understand why only he cannot use magic. Suddenly, an enemy appears before him and looks at him with contempt, calling him useless before throwing his swords in his direction. The scene quickly shifts to Will's friends, and Kiki immediately realizes that he is in danger. Without thinking twice, she starts running to help him, while Sion follows right behind. Meanwhile, the Headless Man continues conducting his chaotic orchestra, spreading destruction throughout the city. He attacks without mercy, as if everything were just part of a spectacle. Despite showing a desire to go out in search of new victims, he restrains himself, remembering that today his role is only to command. At the same time, the most powerful monster advances slowly toward the tower, as if nothing could stop it. Claire realizes that that creature has a level of power enough to defeat a Magia Vander. But even so, she decides to face it. Right after that, the scene shifts again, and the teacher orders everyone to attack the monster, even if that means sacrificing their own lives. The dwarves protest, stating that their people have already been practically destroyed by serving as a shield on the front line. Donnan and many others have already been defeated, and now he intends to send the rest to their deaths. Even so, the teacher insists, saying that they need to do this for the children who are still fighting. At another point on the field, a mage runs to protect Gina and manages to defeat an enemy that was approaching. Confused, she asks the reason, and he replies that their lives are worth less at that moment, and that it is the duty of the older ones to protect the younger ones, even if it costs their own lives. Determined, she stands up and orders everyone to advance toward the center of the capital. Meanwhile, the city continues being devastated without stopping, and everyone tries to resist as they can. A friend of Colette, in the middle of the chaos, wonders where she is, wishing to see her at least one last time. In the midst of the destruction, Eliza appears and saves two students in danger, saying that despite all the trouble they cause, they are still extremely important to her. The scene returns to the headmistress, who receives increasingly worrying reports. They manage to protect the civilians, but they do not have enough strength to make the enemy retreat. Iris explains that, thanks to the efforts of the dwarves, part of the mage slayers has been eliminated, but that is still not enough to stop Vander. On all fronts, the problem is the same. There is not enough power to respond at the same level. The scene returns to Will's confrontation. The enemy who attacked him appears impressed by the teacher's strength, but even so managed to injure him. Will tries to understand what happened, while Werkner, gravely wounded, remains standing with difficulty. Even injured, he smiles, satisfied for having managed to protect Will. He apologizes and admits that, from now on, he can only rely on him. For Werkner, Will is the only person capable of saving the city. However, Will insists that he cannot do that. He feels completely broken seeing so many good people sacrificing themselves for him, while he believes he cannot save anyone. At that moment, Werkner embraces him and reveals that he has been hiding something important all this time. Will can, in fact, use magic. He explains that this will be enough to show everyone that there is still hope, even if it is through a single spell. Desperate, Will begs him not to die and asks him to reveal what his magic is. It is then that Finn appears before him and says that light can pass through anything. He assures that the teacher will survive and states that now, the most important thing is for Will to stand up, because everything has already been prepared for him. Before acting, Will asks what this so-called motivation means. Finn explains that it is not about controlling elements like fire or wind, but rather something much deeper: emotions. Will, still insecure, thinks that this is nothing more than a simple trick and that it will not be enough to save the world. Finn interrupts him and states that this is, in fact, the most important thing of all. He says that anyone who cannot change themselves will never be able to change the world around them. Then he asks Will to remember who he truly is, his origins, and everything that brought him there. He says that the lock has already been opened, and that now the moment has come to wield the sword. This is the beginning of a new journey, crossing the darkness to go beyond the false sky. The sword begins to shine intensely, and Finn asks if Will knows the name of the magic that exists within him. He asks him to declare it out loud, without hesitation. Will then stands up, takes a deep breath, and says, "Courage." At that very moment, his hair turns white, and a new energy takes over his body. He rushes toward the enemy at high speed and begins to defeat all the monsters around him, completely surprising everyone who watches the scene. Charlotte and Sion also move forward to fight. Even though they are already completely exhausted, they refuse to retreat because they know that Will would never give up. Upon hearing that, Will admits that this was not entirely true, because he felt envy and carried a lot of bitterness within himself. Even so, he always admired his friends for never giving up, regardless of the difficulties. With his path finally defined, Will blocks a powerful attack and decides to fight like a solitary sword, moving forward without hesitation. Thus, this intense episode comes to an end, leaving a feeling of tension and hope in the air. And if this moment also gave you chills, we are shown a bit more about Finn, who appears beside a woman named Mercedes, while she holds a child in her arms. The environment is calm, but the conversation carries an enormous weight. Finn then explains to a person who is sitting in front of them that, despite everything that happened, the tower ended up being saved. With that, according to him, the hope of this world begins to slowly return, even if it is still fragile. Upon hearing this, she responds with some distrust, saying that the so-called doomsday clock might be wrong. For her, this hope is extremely unstable, comparing it to a simple twig that can break at any moment under any pressure. Even so, there is a small relief. The celestial stairway has been sealed. This guarantees a brief period of rest for everyone. A short interval before the celestial invaders return to attack and try to devastate the world again. Until that moment arrives, she states that she will take care of several wands, assuming her responsibility, while Finn will be in charge of something equally important, a solitary sword. Faced with this, Finn questions whether she is really sure about this decision. Mercedes then recalls that all of this is part of the agreement that he himself proposed earlier. This is the pact that both accepted to share, a commitment that cannot be broken. According to her, there is no doubt that this plan will give rise to someone capable of using the fifth element. This time, that person needs to find the key that will be responsible for restoring the balance of the world. This agreement between them is more than a simple promise, it is an oath that connects everyone involved. To protect this world, Finn knows that it will be necessary to find both the wand and the sword, because only the union of these elements will be able to make a difference in the future. Observing everything from afar, Finn reflects on everything that has happened so far. He recognizes that there have been countless twists along the way, unexpected situations and difficult moments. But even so, he managed to reach where he is. Now, he wonders what is to come. Will the future hold a great festival, marked by hope, or an unforgiving tragedy that will destroy everything? In addition, Finn also wants to understand how far the pact he made with the esteemed witch will take him. Amid this, Will appears and positions himself directly in front of an attack, blocking it with his sword while it emanates a powerful aura. Everyone around is impressed upon realizing that that person is Will. With surprising ease, he manages to throw the monster far away with a single strike, demonstrating an extraordinary strength. Meanwhile, at the school, the situation is chaotic. People begin to warn that everyone needs to evacuate the place as quickly as possible. However, a girl decides to act and activates one of her powers to block the situation. She remembers that, in the past, they already managed to stop an invasion at the academy. And because of that, she believes that there is still hope. Even so, she wonders what exactly is happening at that moment. When looking ahead, she finds Will, who advances against the monster without hesitation. The two enter into an intense confrontation, and the battle is so violent that it makes the entire city tremble. The people around begin to wonder if he is really facing that terrifying creature alone. Will, in turn, dodges the attacks with great skill, demonstrating precision and control. Even at the royal tower, everyone follows the fight, watching Will face the beast. A woman then asks Ed who that boy fighting the monster is. His reaction is one of irritation, especially upon realizing that it is Will. Meanwhile, some people want to help, but they know that their magical attacks would have no effect at all against that creature. In addition, there is the risk of ending up hitting Will himself and making the situation even worse. The tension increases, and many begin to feel uncomfortable, calling Will a failure and saying that they cannot do anything for him. However, one of the boys recalls that everyone has already been saved by Will before. Suddenly, Sion appears, cheering for him, and soon after other friends also show up, starting to shout and encourage Will. Ed, unconvinced, states that he does not want to leave that fight in the hands of someone who cannot use magic. However, he ends up falling to the ground, and a girl realizes that he has not changed at all. She then says that this is not the moment to try to protect his student, but rather to believe in him and cheer for his victory. Meanwhile, a girl with glasses reflects on the situation. That city is known as the center of magic, and even so everyone is placing their hopes on someone who does not possess magical talent. For many, this sounds completely contradictory. On the battlefield, Will continues facing the beast. While exchanging blows with the monster, he recalls his past, For a long time, he suffered, being despised and ridiculed by everyone around him. There were moments when he even came to hate that world. Even so, somewhere inside himself, there was always the desire to be recognized. That was what he always wanted. Even if this is the only time when everyone is cheering for him, Will decides to move forward. It was that world that gave him the courage to fight, and it is those people that he wants to protect. Determined, he advances against the beast with everything he has. But at the critical moment, his sword ends up breaking. Lady observes the scene and feels that something has changed in Will. At the same time, Elfaria takes a few steps back, while everyone around says that she cannot leave that place. However, that never crossed her mind. In a decisive move, her mana overflows and she throws a sword toward Will. Because of that, his power increases drastically. With Elfaria's help, Will manages to form a new weapon called Albis Wise. Sion recognizes that that sword is similar to the one used by the Grand Duke. It is a special weapon, capable of absorbing spells. Even so, everyone remembers that magic normally has no effect against that beast, no matter how powerful it may be. Even so, with a precise strike, Will finally manages to injure the monster. Meanwhile, the invading mages fall into despair, questioning what is happening and how he managed to overcome the creature they brought. At the tower, everyone watches impressed by the power demonstrated by Will. They know that it is not common magic. Instead, they recognize that it is the fifth element, something described in ancient stories as the primordial key that gave origin to the world. An old man then realizes that Finn has finally found what he was looking for. Everything is connected to the oath made with the Mage Queen, the union between wand and sword. Back to the battle, Will continues dodging the attacks with absolute precision. In a new advance, he strikes the monster again. The creature tries to counterattack, but Will manages to block all the blows and still freezes it in place. The power of the sword, now called Albis Vina, is overwhelming. It is as if the weapon itself were fighting alongside him. Soon after, new portals begin to appear behind Will, leaving everyone worried about what may happen. However, for Elfaria, this does not represent a problem. She believes that, together, they are capable of overcoming any obstacle. Determining the end of the battle, Will plants his sword into the ground and releases a powerful attack, Full Burst, followed by Elglace Frost, L7. In an instant, the entire environment around is taken by ice. The force of the attack is enough to defeat all the enemies with ease. Without wasting time, Will decides to end it once and for all. He advances against the main monster, and, with impressive precision, manages to defeat it. Everyone around is enchanted by his strength, especially the dwarves, who celebrate the victory with great enthusiasm. Meanwhile, Finn watches everything and begins to laugh, completely fascinated by what he is seeing. For him, that is magnificent. Will has exceeded all expectations. He is even better than Finn ever imagined. Now, it becomes clear that he is the last hope that remains. Finally, Finn apologizes to Mercedes for the delay for all of this to happen. He admits that it took him 500 years to reach this moment, all because of a miscalculation. Even so, the waiting time has come to an end. The long prologue finally comes to a close. The curtain rises, marking the true beginning of everything. From now on, the definitive union between the wand and the sword begins. If you made it this far, comment wand and sword so I can be sure that you followed everything until the end. This also helps a lot to strengthen the community and shows that you really enjoyed this journey so far. And so we reach the end of the episode that so many people were waiting for, full of intense moments, twists, and important revelations for the future of the story. I truly hope that you liked this episode and everything that was presented. If you enjoyed the content, do not forget to leave a like, because that helps a lot with the promotion. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next videos and keep following everything that is coming ahead. The story then returns to 3 years earlier. At that moment, everyone becomes completely amazed as they witness real rain falling from the sky. Many people begin celebrating, since the mages were capable of even controlling the weather through their powers. Will watches everything from a distance and becomes fascinated upon realizing how far away the tower is. To him, it seems impossible to imagine any way of reaching it someday. Even so, he wanted to remain by Lady's side despite not being capable of controlling even a single drop of water. While staring at the sky, he begins wondering whether he will truly be able to meet her again someday. Suddenly, a boy appears beside him saying that he will end up catching a cold if he keeps standing in the rain like that. The boy introduces himself as Rosti. He explains that he dreams of becoming a great craftsman and reveals that, starting from that day onward, he will become Will's classmate. In addition, he says that he would really like to become his friend. Meanwhile, Will is accompanied by the teacher, who manages to bring him back to normal. Finn quickly realizes that she has already mastered the legacy left behind by the Mage Queen. He understands that it is thanks to her efforts that Will is still capable of remaining at the academy. Because of that, he knows that she must continue guiding and supporting the boy from that point onward. The editing of Will's memories appears to be functioning correctly. In that way, he will be able to return to being the person he always was before. Even so, Finn continues wondering what exactly Will might be seeing at that moment. The scene then shifts to the professor, and standing before him are Claire and Ed. Ed calls him an idiot for continuing to ignore his own injuries, commenting that he has not changed at all since their school days. Claire understands that he is immortal, but she still believes that he should take a little better care of himself. Without fully understanding the situation, he asks where he is. Eliza responds that they are in the school infirmary. She explains that he had collapsed on the academy rooftop the previous night, so she decided to bring him there. Extremely excited, Eliza celebrates the fact that he has finally awakened. Claire, however, comments that she seems far too cheerful for a rookie vampire. While the two of them begin arguing, Werkner immediately asks where Will is. Ed tells him to calm down, explaining that the boy is currently being taken care of by Wright. According to him, if they leave everything in the teacher's hands, things will certainly work out in the end. The scene changes once again to the teachers, who celebrate the fact that Werkner is all right. Everyone is also happy after discovering that Will be able to return to school, especially because he was the one who worked the hardest during the battle. However, Julius interrupts the celebratory mood and calls everyone idiots. He explains that Will possesses an absurd and incomprehensible power, so there is no need to keep treating him like someone helpless. The others become confused and begin questioning why Julius is acting that way. Julius responds that he does not want to be reminded of the person he used to be in the past. In addition, he claims that everyone there underestimated Will until very recently and were now completely changing their attitudes in the most convenient way possible. In his eyes, everyone had ended up becoming corrupted, just like the old elf. At that moment, the elf himself appears and states that the stubborn one in the situation is actually Julius, even if Will was unable to resolve everything on his own. It was impossible to deny that he saved everyone's lives during that battle. Shortly afterwards, the scene changes to the tower. There, it is revealed that the events in Terminalia left approximately 3,000 people dead or injured. Furthermore, the leaders responsible for the attack are still missing. The Master orders that the investigation be divided among the factions. He also requests that the reconstruction of the destroyed capital begin immediately. Afterwards, he questions the reason why Will did not officially attend the academy during the past 6 years. One of the people believes that this is the director's fault and states that she is certain the director had been deliberately hiding Will. The Master realizes that the director made several important decisions without consulting anyone. Because of that, he decides that, from that moment onward, supervision of the sword will become Finn's responsibility. At that moment, all of the Magia Vander members appear gathered together. The Master asks them to continue searching for information related to the attack that occurred during the students' praxis. The investigation must include the capital, the dungeon, and even the inside of the tower itself. If he had to make a guess, he believes that everything is somehow connected to the great battle that took place 10 years earlier. That causes everyone to remember the destroyers who, in the past, nearly brought the magical world to ruin. One of them asks whether there is any possibility that some survivor from that disaster might still be alive. The elf girl replies that such a thing should be impossible, since her people fought desperately to contain those creatures. However, one of the others reminds her that she did not even participate in that battle and asks whether she plans to run away to the forest again like she did before. Irritated, she immediately attacks the man, destroying a large portion of the surrounding area. Another girl comments that she has completely lost the desire to continue participating in the Magia Vander meetings. When the two of them were just about to start a real fight, the master interrupts them both and orders them to stop immediately. Afterwards, he reinforces that each faction will continue handling its own part of the investigation. He also comments that the pruning of the new sprouts is almost complete and that the season of blooming is rapidly approaching. Because of that, he does not want anyone failing to prepare themselves for what is coming next. At that moment, everyone notices that Sarissa is present and begins asking where Lady is. After all, every Magia Vander member was gathered there except for her. Sarissa responds that Lady claimed she had a stomachache, so she probably would not appear that day. Soon afterwards, the scene shifts to Colette and Lihanna. Colette is bringing flowers for Rosti. Even though he still does not have a grave, she believes that at least this much is something she could do for him. Lihanna asks what kind of person Rosti was, but Colette admits that even she did not know him all that well. Since Rosti studied to become an artificer, he rarely appeared around the campus. All she really knew was that he had come from the western capital of Tiralis as a transfer student. He appeared out of nowhere and quickly became close to Will. Colette admits that she always felt a little jealous of that friendship. Even so, she remembers that Will constantly said Rosti was a precious friend to him. Sometime later, everyone begins helping with the reconstruction of the destroyed city. Thanks to the work of the dwarves, the repairs advance at an astonishing speed. Suddenly, Iris appears before Finn. He remembers that he has already asked her several times to stop calling him that way. However, Iris completely ignores the request and states that she despises him from the bottom of her heart. Finn asks the reason behind so much hatred, but she merely responds that he should keep his distance from Will. If Finn becomes too deeply involved, the hands of the clock will advance all at once. She warns him that, if that happens, nobody will be capable of stopping that person anymore. Finn believes that Iris simply has feelings for Will. However, he has already made his decision. He intends to bring Will to his side no matter what. The story then returns to the past once again. Rosti asks Will whether he would feel sad if one day he disappeared. He also says that a farewell would be something extremely painful. Will asks him not to say things like that because he cares about him a lot. Rosti then reminds him that, once Will finally climbs the tower, he probably will not have enough points to accompany him. Even so, he promises that he will continue taking care of him, no matter how great the distance between them becomes. Will remembers that dream and wakes up immediately afterwards. Upon waking up and touching his face, he ends up seeing Rosti, but quickly remembers that he died and that it is actually only his cat there beside him. While the students gradually left their dormitories, the entire Regarden Magic Academy began preparing for the graduation ceremony. Even with the event taking place, the atmosphere still carried a sorrowful feeling because of the tragedy in Terminaria. Many lives had been lost during the attack, including students, teachers, and even members sent to defend the tower. As she begins her speech, the director pays tribute to the people who died and remembers the efforts of those who risked everything to protect the citizens. However, she also makes it clear that they could not continue remaining trapped only in pain and suffering. In her view, the attack against the tower might have been merely the beginning of even greater threats. Precisely because of that, she believed the new generation needed to continue moving forward without losing hope in the future. Soon afterwards, the ceremony officially began. The graduates of Class 401 were called onto the stage one by one. In total, 250 students successfully completed all the Academy's courses and received recognition as fully graduated mages. However, the most important moment came immediately afterwards: the selection of the students authorized to ascend the tower. The director once again explained the two requirements needed to enter it. The first was accumulating 7,200 academic credits. The second was far more difficult, creating an entirely new form of magic. Several names began being announced while the approved students received Mercedes hats, the official symbol of admission into the tower. 49 students managed to fulfill every requirement completely. However, there was still one more candidate remaining. According to the director, he almost failed to meet the necessary conditions, but he accomplished something impossible to ignore. The magic created by him saved countless lives during the tragedy, drove away the population's despair, and helped protect the entire city. The name of that magic was Courage. Then, Serfort was called onto the stage. The decision generated divided reactions among the people present, but the director declared that anyone capable of recognizing the value of that magic should applaud him. Little by little, the entire hall began clapping for him. Even so, Ed still appeared unable to accept it completely. He questioned why everyone seemed so optimistic after everything that had happened. To him, the suffering experience there should have destroyed every last trace of hope. Serfort responded in a simple manner. He said that he believed everyone would manage to overcome everything because there was someone strong enough to guide him all the way there. A frightening, yet kind teacher. After that, the ceremony finally came to an end. The 50 chosen students received official approval to advance toward the tower. During the closing speech, the director reminded everyone that their generation would face difficult times from that point onward. Many obstacles would still appear, and every one of them would need to overcome new trials. Even so, she wished for all of them to continue moving forward without falling into darkness. While the students celebrated the beginning of a new chapter, someone observed everything from afar. For certain people, that moment marked the true beginning of a new era, and amidst so many losses, fear, and uncertainties, some still continued believing that it was possible to change the future with their own hands. In the past, when they were still children, Elfaria used to tell Will about the sunset that existed beyond a great tunnel. She said they would have to face many dangers to reach it, and because of that, both of them needed to master many kinds of magic. Even though Will felt weak and insecure beside her, Elfaria made it clear that she would never move forward without him at her side, saying that she wanted to achieve that dream together with him. 5 years later, in the present, Will is finally heading to the tower where Elfaria is. The chosen students gather at the Les Ale boutique to receive new special cloaks connected to the colored glory, the symbol of the High Mages. While trying on the uniforms, several students praise the quality of the clothes, but they notice that Julius is acting strangely irritated. They soon discover that practically every student has already received invitations from factions within the tower, except for him, which explains his concern. Meanwhile, Will visits Donan at the forge and receives a new sword called the Silver Wizard, rebuilt from the old destroyed blade. The new weapon is still capable of cutting through magic and can also amplify magical energy. Donan refuses to charge anything for the work, treating the sword as a gift in gratitude for everything Will has done. After that, the 50 students head toward the tower, where they are welcomed by Claire, a very lively high mage. She opens the enormous doors of the place and introduces the tower as both a paradise of magical research and an academic hell. As he steps inside, Will remembers that he only managed to come this far thanks to Rosti's help, since Rosti guided him to that point and brought him closer and closer to Elfaria. Despite the initial excitement, the students become confused as soon as they enter the place, since the interior appears completely empty. Without explaining much, Claire simply activates magical access through their names, unlocking another door using a new spell. Right after that, everyone notices that the ceiling has begun to open. Not only that, but the very floor beneath them starts rising slowly, making the group realize they are being taken to another level. A short time later, they finally arrive at the first level of the tower, known as the Colorless Garden. The sight leaves everyone completely astonished. Inside the tower, there is an entire colorless city with its own sky, horizon, and even light. There is even a castle floating in the middle of that gigantic place. The space is so vast that some begin to wonder whether they are truly still inside the tower. Claire then officially welcomes them to the Colorless Garden and explains that when outsiders mention the higher institute, they are usually referring to the facilities on that floor. According to her, the place supports the entire tower, functioning as the foundation of life inside it, as well as a massive academic center dedicated to the creation and research of new magic. Only individuals recognized by the Academy are allowed to enter that place, and that is exactly why, for many mages, it represents a true kingdom of glory. Some students become so emotional at the sight before them that they cannot hold back their tears, happy simply for having the chance to see such a place. Claire then informs them that becoming permanent residents depends solely on themselves. Without wasting time, she officially welcomes them to the colorless garden and asks everyone to wait in the main hall for the ceremony. While walking through the city, Leona asks Wignall about the sky and light present in that environment. He replies that it is certainly elven illusion magic at an extremely advanced level. Colette looks around beside Will, noticing that many people there carry the same glory as them. Excitedly, she comments about a Mori garden apparently filled with incredibly rare magical herbs, as well as an area dedicated to experiments involving magical creatures. Overflowing with excitement, Colette practically jumps for joy as she declares that the place truly represents the pinnacle of magical research. She admits that it might be late to say it, but she finally feels like she has truly become a high-level mage. W agrees with her and comments that everything feels like a dream coming true. Shortly afterward, CET casually mentions that there is even a crepe shop inside the place. However, the moment Leena hears that information, she completely freezes. Without thinking twice, she activates Sick and uses the spell Lissol de Duba Algis. In less than a second, she rushes at high speed toward the shop and immediately orders 5 crepes to go. A little later, Colette drags her back to the group while complaining that they are still in the middle of the entrance ceremony and that it clearly was not the time to go buying food. Even while listening to the scolding, Leena happily continues eating the crepes as she is pulled away. Watching the entire scene, Will simply smiles and comments that Leena truly remains exactly the same as always. Wignall agrees and comments that seeing Leena acting that way even brings a certain sense of comfort at that moment. While Will enjoys watching the whole situation, Scene walks past him and warns him not to create too many expectations, because the tower is far from being the friendly place they imagined. At first, Will does not really understand the reason for the warning, but he soon notices the cold and judgmental gazes of the high mages directed at all of them. After walking for some time, the group finally arrives at the pruning ceremony hall, where the representatives of each faction were already waiting for the students. Colette quietly admits that the way those mages stare at everyone there is genuinely frightening. Among the figures present was Kraut Harl, director of the Higher Institute and also leader of the Colorless Garden. As soon as all the students enter the hall, the Magianders finally decide to appear before them. Most of the students become excited to see them in person. Wignall smiles upon spotting Eleanor among them, but she simply looks away without responding to his excitement. Even so, he also shows happiness at finally reuniting with Aria. Will, on the other hand, feels his heart race when he sees Faria again. However, unlike what he expected, she seems sad and cannot even look directly at him. Claire thanks the noble Magianders for all the work they do from atop the tower. However, Kakarot simply replies that the ceremony has always been tiring and boring, then asks her to finish quickly before everyone loses patience. Even irritated, Aelier keeps a forced smile and comments that her dear junior truly seems to have risen quite high in life, although she was already used to the way he treated her descendant. Cariot starts laughing and replies that he also had to deal with extremely troublesome superiors in the past, which forced him to work hard. Ignoring the argument, Claire decides to continue the ceremony and announces the beginning of the first blooming. She explains that, during the 6 years at the Academy, and especially after the Grand Magic Festival, some students were chosen to receive the so-called Blessing of Color. At that very moment, all the Magianders raise their wands, and the glories worn by several students begin to change color. Sion notices that his glory turns an intense red, while Colette's takes on a dark brown shade. In addition, the brush symbol on her uniform transforms into the emblem of the Earth faction. Unlike them, however, the glories of Julius and Will remain completely colorless, making it clear that no faction chose to recruit them. The day before, Elfaria had thrown a huge tantrum while accusing Zarissa of lying to her, since she had promised that if Will managed to reach the tower, she would finally be allowed to recruit him. Sarissa explains that she could not do that while he was still at the academy, so she had to wait until Will proved his true worth before the tower. However, all the recruitment letters sent to him never reached their destination, and that happened because of someone else's interference. Teresa clarifies that it was not her doing, but rather the higher institute itself, since many still had doubts about officially allowing someone who fights like a swordsman to join a faction. For a brief moment, Elfaria considers personally going to the higher institute and freezing everything around her. Darius quickly asks her to calm down and explains that if Will proves his worth during the first blooming, Kratz and the others will inevitably accept him. After all, the tower operates as an extreme meritocracy. If Elfaria recruited him now simply because she wanted to, it would end up destroying the image everyone has of Will Serfort. As someone extraordinary, he must earn the recognition of the entire tower with his own hands. In addition, Darius assures her that Claire will handle the issues involving the other factions and the necessary procedures. After hearing that, Theo finally calms down, because she knows that Will certainly be able to overcome that challenge. Back in the present, Claire informs the chosen students that the blessing of color already represents a great honor on its own, and that the factions are now officially waiting for them. While the selected students walk toward their respective groups, she turns her attention to those who remained colorless. According to Claire, the colorless are considered useless within the tower. Only mages tied to a faction can reach the upper floors, while the others remain trapped forever on the first floor, living merely as secondary pieces that support the tower's great and exceptional witches. Julius was already aware of that reality and comments that there is a dark nickname for the tower, the Graveyard of Wands. Even so, Claire explains that everyone who managed to reach that place will still have one opportunity. They must prove their worth at that very moment, and perhaps they will be recruited by a faction. She then declares that this is the true main event of the first blooming. If they have not managed to show their brilliance until now, then the time has come to reveal their colors and bloom before the tower. As soon as Claire announces the beginning of the test, several monsters immediately appear before the colorless students. She explains that there is only one rule inside the tower: prove your own worth. The task seems simple. They only need to defeat those creatures using whatever techniques or magic they have mastered. Claire even advises the participants to use flashy spells and fight without holding back if they want to impress the faction. Despite the apparent simplicity, many students begin struggling because their magic simply does not work against the monsters. Kirat then explains that those creatures are called Soctonia and were created by the tower itself as guardians of the first floor. Taking into account the individual power of each one, they are equivalent to upper mid-level dungeon monsters, each worth around 30 credits. For newly graduated academy mages, defeating them would normally be impossible, since their double shields reflect practically any superficial magic. Even so, Julius instantly defeats two Soctonias using his magic, showing that his strength has evolved tremendously since the Grand Magic Festival. Chris even feels pressured upon realizing that Julius can already control Faria's cloning magic at that level. Erwin Oris, leader of the Wind faction, admits that Julius is clearly above the other participant. Monica Orphan, assistant of the same faction, comments that someone with that kind of talent would be an immediate reinforcement if he joined their group. Even members of the Darkness faction do not understand why someone so skilled still has not received a recruitment offer. Julius continues trying to attract attention, proudly claiming that he is a true genius for mastering cloning magic, in addition to being a talented and handsome young noble. However, no matter how much he tries to impress Elfaria, she completely refuses to even look at him once, mercilessly wounding his pride. Yoli believes that this happens because of the Grand Magic Festival, since Julius was extremely rude to the talentless girl. However, Sarisa comments that Will has been attracting a lot of attention as well, although in a controversial way, since he apparently was only dodging the Soctonia's attacks. Even so, Lion and Collet realize that he was not running away, but carefully analyzing the enemy's attack patterns. While fighting, Will understands that Elfaria seemed sad because she could not recruit him into her faction, but he decides to continue following his own path in order to reach her through his own strength. After observing the creatures long enough, he finally counterattacks, defeating a Soctonia with a single strike. Everyone becomes impressed by his speed, strength, and ability to predict the monster's movements. The glory Will uses makes his movements lighter and faster, while the sword created by Donan is capable of cutting through anything. During the battle, Julius launches a magical attack that ends up heading toward Elfaria. Without thinking twice, Will jumps in to protect her and uses his sword to completely absorb the magic from the attack. Shortly afterward, he unleashes the power of Glaus WHZ and charges against the Soctonias using Glaus 1000, defeating all the creatures with tremendous speed and strength. Unlike the last time, he keeps the power under control without his hair turning white. In that way, Will finally proves before the entire tower just how powerful he truly is. At the end of the battle, Elfaria watches everything with happiness, because she always believed that he would be able to overcome any obstacle. Everyone was left in shock after seeing Will defeat all those robots by himself. The crowd immediately began talking non-stop, trying to understand what he had just done, since he had used blizzard magic together with a wind sword. Little by little, everyone realized that this was the same Will who had appeared during the Terminalia incident. Soon after, Elfaria was the first to invite him to join her faction. Will's friends were amazed to discover that he had been invited by the Ice faction. But it did not stop there, because shortly afterward the Fire faction also showed interest in him. Before long, everyone realized that Will had received invitations from every faction. That left everyone stunned, while Julius grew increasingly irritated as he realized that Will was stealing all the attention for himself. The announcer then explained that Will was free to choose whichever faction he wished to join. However, before the situation could progress further, one of the men interrupted everything and asked everyone to wait a moment, claiming that what Will used could not truly be considered magic. He acknowledged that the boy's actions during the Terminalia incident had been important, and because of that, he had been allowed to climb the tower as a celebration. Even so, there was still doubt about whether Will truly possessed the qualifications necessary to enter one of the magical factions. Vina immediately questioned whether Kreutz had not seen what had just happened. After all, Will had used several different spells in front of everyone. Kreutz calmly replied that he had observed everything perfectly. However, in his view, Will had not cast any magic at all, but merely taken advantage of other people's magical power. To Kreutz, Will's true nature was not that of a mage, but rather an extremely brutal warrior. In his opinion, allowing Will to reach the tower was the same as allowing a dwarf to climb up there. Just the thought alone filled the man with fear. Eleanor then told Kreutz to stop dragging things out and get straight to the point. If Will possessed any magical talent, then he needed to prove it right there in front of everyone. Because of that, Kreutz decided to summon magical creatures created specifically to subjugate dwarves. Those monsters were known as Wurzus. He asked everyone to watch carefully and demonstrated how to defeat one of them easily with a single magical strike. According to him, even weak magic was enough to destroy those creatures, because their slimy bodies could only be affected by mana. In other words, someone incapable of generating mana would never be able to defeat them. Will immediately charged forward and sliced the creature in half, but the monster simply regenerated moments later. Kreutz explained that physical attacks were completely useless against that species. One of the Magia Vander quickly spoke up, stating that Kreutz was telling the truth. The tower represented the absolute pinnacle of the magical world, and a sword incapable of using magic on its own would never be allowed to advance. Even after hearing that, Will continued attacking over and over again, but none of his strikes seemed to work. Even so, he knew that monsters of that type usually hit a core inside their bodies. After observing it carefully, Will managed to spot the core and tried to strike it directly. However, even then, the attack had no effect whatsoever. The man then explained that those creatures were made entirely of viscous liquid, so destroying them was not something so simple. Suddenly, the monster unleashed a powerful electric discharge, forcing Will to retreat immediately. Seeing that, his friends remembered everything he had done to save them and decided to help him. However, the man stopped everyone and declared that Will needed to face it alone. According to him, that was an inquisitorial hearing created specifically to eliminate irregular elements, showing no interest in dragging things out any further. Kreutz used his own magic and made the monster disappear within seconds. To him, continuing that discussion was merely a waste of time. In his opinion, Will should remain nothing more than an incolor. His name should stay among the lower classes of the higher institute. Even so, he acknowledged that the power used to defeat the Devander known as wise, was truly terrifying. Because of that, he intended to study it and ensure that power would serve the magical world. Many immediately understood that Will would end up becoming nothing more than a research test subject. Elfaria was clearly irritated by the situation. At that moment, another Magia Vander asked everyone to quiet down already. He stated that, regardless, they still needed to carry out another blooming, so he wanted to leave that exhausting discussion for later. One of the women explained that under normal circumstances, the next blooming would only happen 6 months later. However, after the losses suffered in Terminalia, replacing the lost members of each faction had become urgent. Because of that, that year would be different, and a second blooming would take place only 1 week later. She further explained that, after surviving a tragedy of that scale, all the young people possessed the potential to grow more than any other generation in the magical world. Those students were called the Calamitous Generation, and the entire world placed great expectations upon them. According to her, everyone would need to train to their limits, to the point of coughing up blood if necessary. Precisely because of that, those who had not received blessings that day would need to work even harder to achieve better results in the next blooming, and that included Will as well. The man was clearly irritated by that decision. Even so, the Magia Vander agreed, stating that they would continue observing the value of each individual, exactly as they had done until becoming Magia Vander themselves. Soon afterward, everyone began leaving the place, while the man remained irritated, unable even to let out a sigh of relief. Julius was also frustrated after discovering that he would have to go through all of that once again in only a week. As for Will, he ended up collapsing onto the ground and started laughing at his own situation. To him, whenever something finally seemed within his reach, some obstacle would always appear in his path. Even so, Will had no intention of giving up. No matter how many times he needed to try, he swore that he would overcome any difficulty. The scene then shifts to one of the Magia Vander. While a boy comments that he finds it strange that Lord Zio had done absolutely nothing until that moment. In his opinion, Zio seemed to like people like Will. The man then explained that individuals capable of rising from rock bottom were the most interesting to watch and, usually, also became the strongest. After that, the scene returns to Will, who was now studying various types of magic in order to pass the test scheduled for the following week. Aside from elven magic, he decided to carefully analyze the 7 elements to find a new way to use power. Will considered himself a failure for not having a natural affinity with any magical element. However, even though he could not use magic normally, that did not mean he was incapable of manipulating mana. That was when he decided to study the power known as Wise in order to prove it. In his mind, if he could understand that phenomenon and learn how to properly make use of mana, he would certainly find a path to evolve. As he thought about it, several people began to be impressed by his determination. To many of them, there was something completely strange about Will. Suddenly, a girl appeared in front of him and started talking to him. Will immediately remembered that she was one of the girls who had spoken to him after the Grand Magic Festival. The girl then introduced herself as Emma Clever. She explained that everyone was planning to go to the dungeon before the next blooming. According to Emma, the group had already received official permission from the Higher Institute. She continued by saying that they were all becoming high mages, so they now had permission to descend beyond the 10th floor of the dungeon. In addition, they believed that facing the Guardians would be the best way for everyone to train together. The group wanted to join the Fire faction and follow in Sion's footsteps. They also knew that doing so would not erase the mistakes and failures of the past, but they still wanted to keep moving forward. After hearing everything, Will decided to accept the invitation. However, before they could continue the conversation, Julius suddenly appeared saying that he wanted to train together with Will. He stated that playing around and making friends was not what Will needed at that moment. The most important thing right now was learning how to control the power called Wise. Because of that, Julius decided to help him personally. Will was surprised and admitted that such help would be extremely useful, but he still wanted to understand why Julius would do something like that. Julius replied that a lot had happened recently, but that he, Wignall, and the others already considered Will a true companion. Without thinking twice, Will accepted the offer. Even so, Julius had his own interests. He intended to help Will because he knew Elfaria would eventually see all of it. To him, earning points with her would increase his chances of entering the Ice faction. Julius intended to take as much advantage of Will as possible and would do anything necessary to join that faction. Without wasting any more time, Julius told Will to stop stalling and begin the training immediately. The scene then shifts to the two training together. Will manages to charge his sword and asks what he should do next. Julius then explains that the monsters used in the training were low-level guardians. However, if they were filled with enough mana, they would not disappear easily even when struck by magic of the same element. From that moment on, Julius wanted Will to learn how to carefully control his energy consumption while fighting and moving. According to him, that would be the first step toward preventing the Guardians from being destroyed too quickly during training. Julius then decides that he will make Will learn how to use Wise in a way that allows him to activate that power on his own. He recalls that Will spent 6 entire years attending the academy and, even so, never managed to use even the most basic spell possible. Because of that, instead of wasting time trying to learn existing conventional magic, Julius believed it would be far more useful to focus on the power that Will already possessed naturally. Will understood perfectly what Julius meant, but he still had no idea how he could achieve that. After all, since he could not use magic by himself, he had always depended on charging himself with other people's magic. In his view, trying to manually prepare Wise using only his own strength sounded like a complete contradiction. What Julius was proposing was practically the same as turning 0 into 1, something similar to creating an entirely new form of magic. Julius then tells Will to stop overthinking and listen carefully. According to him, the method was much simpler than it seemed. The name of the technique was mana anchoring. Even if the mana initially used belonged to Julius, if Will managed to keep it anchored inside himself long enough, that energy would eventually become part of him. Julius explains that if Will's current capacity were equivalent to 100, he would only need to maintain 100th or even 1,000th of that amount active. The most important thing at that moment was drastically reducing energy consumption while continuing to sustain mana within his own body. In addition, Will needed to learn how to carefully control that flow of power. The ideal objective would be to use Wise only during combat, activating the power only when it was truly necessary. If Will managed to do that, then it could practically already be considered real magic. Julius then reminds him that during the next blooming, Will would probably have to face that same ooze once again. Therefore, the only important goal was finding a way to defeat that creature. Because of that, it did not matter if Will could only control an extremely small amount of mana. According to Julius, there was a limit to how much someone could evolve in only 1 week. So instead of trying to solve everything at once, Will needed to reverse the logic of the training and reduce his challenges as much as possible. After hearing the entire explanation, Will finally begins to understand the true purpose of that training. To prevent the Guardians from being destroyed during the exercise, he needed to develop enough skill to keep the mana anchored in a stable and lasting way. In other words, the Guardians themselves would serve as limiters to help him learn how to control mana with precision. Will sincerely thanked Julius for the help and commented that he still could not understand how someone so skilled had not been chosen by any faction. At the exact same moment, Julius became irritated and replied that all of it was Will's own fault. While the two continued training, a woman watched everything from afar. Seeing their dedication and determination, she could not help but think about how impressive the power of youth truly was. Shortly afterward, the story returns to the present. Even though he trains non-stop, Will continues to face enormous difficulties. Julius asks how many attempts they have made so far. Despite repeatedly defeating the Guardians, Will has failed to show any meaningful improvement. Julius then asks how much longer he plans to keep wasting mana like that. Will apologizes and explains that no matter how hard he tries to control the power, he can only keep Wise active for 50 minutes. After that, all of his mana simply disappears. Even worse, when Wise falls apart, his stamina vanishes all at once as well. He never imagined that ability hid such a severe drawback. The way things are going, it all feels like a complete waste of time. Julius tells him to try again, but before they can restart, Julius drops to one knee. In his opinion, it might be better to fully understand whys first. Although he is not certain, he believes that is the most sensible approach. We soon learn that Will has searched nearly every book in the Academy library but has found nothing truly useful. Professor Werkner seemed to know something about the subject, yet admitted that he did not know the details. Will believes it may take a long time, but he plans to ask the High Mages for access to the tower's libraries. Another possibility is finding someone who understands the subject. Julius reveals that he is already working on it. He sent one of his clones to investigate every library in the Upper Institute. In addition, he asked Professor Eliza to locate Finn of the Light People, since he appeared to know something about whys. Julius says he cannot afford to waste time. The only option is to train and gather information simultaneously. However, handling so many tasks at once gives him a severe headache, since he has to keep track of 3 different perspectives at the same time. That is why he hates multitasking. Will then asks why Julius is working so hard to help him. Julius replies that he is doing it entirely for his own benefit. As a member of the Riemberg family, he has decided to reach the top of the tower no matter what. To accomplish that goal, he is using Will as part of his plans. After all, nobles always keep their promises. Will remembers that this is true. After the Grand Magic Festival, Julius kept his word. That even applied to Master Donan and the other dwarves. Because of that, Will believes Julius is an extremely kind person. Elk comments that kindness takes different forms depending on the person. Colette's kindness, which leads her to constantly help others, is different from Professor Werkner's kindness, which comes through scolding and teaching. Even Sion has his own kind of kindness, though it is tied to pride and nobility. Even so, Will still sees Julius as an incredibly kind person. Those words remind Julius of someone who said the exact same thing in the past. Deciding to stop training, he steps away to rest. However, he becomes irritated when he thinks about how kindness has no value at all. The story shifts back to the past. Julius saves a cat, and Anna praises him, saying he is a very kind person. Back then, Julius always claimed that protecting the weak was the duty of every noble. He then asks Anna if she likes him, and the girl answers yes. Even so, the memory only deepens his frustration. No matter how kind he was, he still lost Anna. That was when he decided to abandon that way of thinking. He came to believe that selfishness offered far greater rewards. Instead of acting for others, he would display his talents, use people when necessary, mock those who look down on him, and take advantage of every opportunity available. Back in the present, Julius simply wants Will to stop looking at him the same way Anna once did. To him, the kind Julius was buried in the past. Meanwhile, in Kreutz's laboratory, the researcher considers all of Will and Julius's efforts completely pointless. Without wasting any time, he orders his disciple to contact a certain person as quickly as possible. Shortly afterward, Julius is suddenly attacked. He blocks the strike and asks whether the attackers belong to the Upper Institute. Tony replies that he is merely following his superior's orders. The group came to punish those responsible for the strange incidents in the garden and put an end to that annoying training. Julius asks if they truly intend to interfere. He then questions whether they can still call themselves Tower Mages. Despite being attacked repeatedly, he dodges every strike with ease. One of the opponents explains that they reached the tower, but were unable to advance any further. After all the humiliation they suffered, they believe defeating Julius and will earn them recommendation letters from every faction. Julius understands the situation perfectly. It is simply another result of the cruel rivalry within the tower. In their desperate attempt to escape the graveyard, those wands even abandoned their own pride. Corrupted as they are, they remain high mages. However, Julius has spent too much mana using his guardians and Ars Weiss, so he is far from his best condition. Even so, he laughs at his opponents. He says Tony is a year older than him, Mary is still arrogant, and Oron was already conceited despite being younger. According to Julius, after creating spells and reaching the tower so quickly, they ended up becoming complete failures. To him, they are all pitiful. The Upper Institute has consumed them completely. He refuses to end up as discarded trash the same way they did. The three respond that no faction chose him either. Just like them, Julius remains colorless. Without hesitation, Julius introduces himself as Julius Riemberg. He declares that he will rely on anyone necessary to become stronger. He intends to climb the tower as quickly as possible and become Lady Elfaria's successor. Once he reaches the top, he will look down on everyone who abandoned him. To achieve that goal, he is willing to use even Vander magic. Even so, he regrets to say that those three are not worth the effort. Furious, they declare that they have hated Julius ever since their school days and demand his death. Fortunately, Will arrives just in time and saves Julius. Right afterward, he apologizes for being late. He explains that he was attacked by high mages and therefore suspected that Julius might also be in danger. Julius asks why he insisted on helping him. Will replies that he knows very well how much Julius embarrassed him during the Grand Magic Festival. On top of that, Julius has repeatedly said that he acts out of pure selfishness and is only using him to achieve his goals. Julius then asks if he is an idiot. Without hesitation, Will answers yes. He tends to like people who are kind to him. After all, he really is a huge idiot. Annoyed and unsure how to respond, Julius punches Will in the face. Immediately afterward, completely embarrassed, he declares that he hates him and despises him deeply. Tony and the others decide to put an end to everything once and for all. However, at that moment, Swordsman appears before them. Using her magic, she creates a circle of fire around the area. She asks if she may introduce herself as Will's teacher. The moment he hears that name, Julius immediately remembers who she is. Like the Watchers, Swordsman is one of the Academy's 7 legends. Many rumors claim that she kidnaps students night after night to perform strange experiments on them. Because of that, she became known as the Hammer Witch. Swordsman denies those stories. According to her, she does nothing that frightening. Whenever she finds interesting students, she simply trains and guides them. That is exactly what she intends to do with the 2 young men standing before her. She reveals that they may not realize it, but she has been watching both of them for a very long time. Julius is completely confused by this. After all, he has never seen that witch before. Without offering any further explanation, Swordsman uses her magic to grab both of them. She says they can discuss the details later. Before anything else, they need to leave. If they remain there, more members of the Upper Institute will eventually find them. Taking the 2 of them along, she asks them to join her little game and let her have some fun. The scene shifts to the tower. Iris asks why Lady never granted her blessing to Julius. In her view, someone so talented should not remain in the shadows. As an observer, she feels she cannot simply ignore the situation. Lady replies that Julius said countless offensive things to her. On top of that, he constantly used to intimidate Will. After hearing the explanation, the girls quickly realize that the issue is entirely personal. Lady then asks for Lord Aaron's opinion of Will. Iris explains that he believes events should follow their natural course. Lord Aaron thinks differently from the Cauldron leadership. He is not nearly as enthusiastic about the idea of a sword walking alongside the wands. Even so, if that sword chooses to carve its own path, he will respect both its determination and its strength. Lady's subordinate comments that ever since the appearance of Wise, the tower has been divided over how to respond. More than anything, she wants to understand exactly what Wise is. Even she does not fully understand the phenomenon. All she knows is that it is a power capable of turning the world upside down. Although she realizes it may sound disrespectful in front of Lady, she admits that she still has not decided where she stands regarding that power. Iris responds that if the situation involving veteran Wills becomes a problem, she will personally take responsibility for him as an observer. Therefore, she asks Lady not to worry. Lady simply comments that crazy people truly have no fear of exposing their own delusions. Immediately afterward, both of them allow their auras to emerge, making it clear that they each have a special interest in Will. The story then returns to Will and Julius. After some time, they finally arrive at the place where the witch is living. As soon as they enter, she invites them to sit wherever they like. Without delay, the woman prepares an enormous meal for her 2 guests. Julius immediately states that he would never put anything made by a witch into his mouth. However, when he looks to the side, he realizes that Will has already been eating for quite a while. Confused, Julius asks what kind of place this is. The woman explains that it is a secret hideout built by Claire on the tower's first floor. She currently uses it with Claire's permission. After all, Claire is her apprentice. Without lowering his guard, Julius asks about her true intentions, since she appeared out of nowhere and saved them both. Will asks him to be a little more patient. No matter what, she ended up helping them. However, Julius insists that will be more careful. According to him, the woman could easily be an assassin sent by the Upper Institute who is merely pretending to have good intentions. Furthermore, even if she is not an enemy, any mage devoted to perfecting their craft rarely does anything without expecting some kind of benefit in return. The stories surrounding the 7 legends themselves suggest that she might be interested in turning them into test subjects. The witch replies that the situation is complicated. She admits that caution is usually an important quality for any talented mage. However, this time Julius is completely wrong. To prove it, she opens several magic circles simultaneously. Will watches in amazement. The ease with which she casts those spells is unbelievable. From the portals emerge attacks from nearly every known element except light. The woman explains that if she truly wanted to hurt anyone there, she could eliminate both of them within seconds. Although that does not completely prove her intentions, she hopes it is enough to convince Julius. After all, if she were an evil witch, he would have been eaten long ago. Even so, Julius demands a proper explanation. Unless she reveals her goals, he will not allow Will to become her disciple. The witch then reveals that she possesses some knowledge about wise. She may not know everything, but she believes she can help Will better understand that power. That is the first reason she decided to appear. The second reason involves the Upper Institute. According to her, the methods they use are highly questionable. There are people working to isolate Will and turn him into a target for their own interests. Upon hearing that, Will immediately realizes who she is talking about. The scene shifts to that man. He has just received news that Will has disappeared. According to the reports, someone interfered before they could carry out their plans. Without wasting any time, he orders the search efforts to be intensified. There is no record of anyone leaving the tower's first floor, which means Will must still be hiding somewhere. One of the subordinates asks why he is willing to pick a fight with Lady Elfaria just to capture Will. The man replies that it would be a waste to hand someone so valuable over to people obsessed with conflict and war. According to him, wise must be used efficiently. As he speaks, he observes a creature known as a mage killer. He admits that he does not know which organization created it, but considers its efficiency extraordinary. Even monsters with little intelligence are capable of using it properly, and there is also the possibility of mass producing them. In his view, that should be the real objective. With only 5 extremely durable blades, the celestial invaders became opponents that were nearly impossible to defeat. Because of that, he believes they should not focus solely on exceptional individuals, but instead create standardized supremacy. His goal is to turn wise into a tool that anyone can use. To him, that is the greatest challenge the Upper Institute must overcome. However, before any progress can be made, Will must be studied in detail. His body needs to be analyzed. As he says this, he begins cutting apart the monster in front of him. One of the subordinates expresses concern. Not even the tower factions or the Vander Magia know that this project is taking place. If Lady Elfaria discovers the truth, the Upper Institute could face severe consequences. The man, however, shows no concern. He orders them to inform the factions that they will soon have an effective way to deal with the mage killers. After that, he intends to completely uncover the secrets of wise. The story then returns to the witch. She explains that her wish has always been to watch young people follow their own paths and grow on their own. However, the current situation has gone too far. She has no intention of standing by while others try to turn them into mere research subjects. That is precisely why she decided to help Will. In addition, Elfaria personally asked her to intervene. After explaining everything, the woman states that the decision is now in their hands. What happens from this point forward will depend entirely on Will and Julius. Will replies that he wants to trust her. For some reason, he feels that the witch is telling the truth. It is difficult to explain, but it feels as though he has known her for much longer than he should have. Satisfied with his answer, she decides to help the two of them. Then, completely out of nowhere, she makes a strange request. She says she knows it sounds sudden, but asks both of them to take off their clothes. And with that, another episode comes to an end. Will ends up being forced to take off his shirt. The situation leaves him extremely embarrassed, but the witch, practically fascinated by the sight, simply tells him to stay still. Seeing this, Julius becomes even more irritated, since he had always suspected she had ulterior motives behind her actions. The witch then asks Will to lower his arms so she can get a better look at him. As he watches the scene unfold, Julius concludes that she really is nothing more than a pervert. However, when she examines the boy's back, her expression changes completely. She is shocked by the huge number of scars covering Will's body. Julius had heard many rumors about him before, but now he wonders how many of them were actually true. It is also obvious that Will sacrificed a great deal to make it to the tower. The witch approaches his back and asks how he got those scars. Will replies that he believes he got them while protecting Elfie when they were children, though he cannot clearly remember the details. A moment later, she gives his back a hard slap. She then explains that she is looking for the second door. During all that time, she had carefully observed both of their training sessions. In her opinion, Will was very smart to focus on anchoring. If he can learn to control the mana he absorbs, that path will certainly lead him to wise. Her reasoning is correct, but she believes he needs to be more honest with himself. In the end, she praises the training Julius conducted. Even so, the boy believes all that effort produced no results at all. The witch disagrees. According to her, Julius was right from the beginning because Will is the very definition of anchoring. The truth is that he has already surpassed the barrier related to mana storage. That is because the blood of mages and wands runs through his veins. However, Will's body has an unusual trait. Unlike everyone else, he cannot release mana on his own. His body absorbs magical energy from the environment and constantly stores it. Now, Will's task is to learn how to access that reserve whenever he wants. That is the next goal he must achieve. Confused, Will asks her to wait a second. His entire life, he believed he needed external spells to recharge his power. The witch replies that this is not entirely wrong, but there is more to it than that. The proof is that he has already activated his power before without using any previously stored spells. From now on, he must put that concept into practice. By revisiting the source of this magic tied to his blood and memories, he will be able to recharge himself without relying on anyone else's magic. It will be a completely new way of recharging. Creating a magic circle, the witch pushes Will into its center. She explains that she will guide her own mana through the lock inside him and lead him to a specific place. To do that, Will must reconnect with his origins. Whatever he discovers there must be engraved deeply into both his mind and body. When the spell activates, the lock finally opens. The witch warns him to be careful. As he dives into his memories, Will awakens in a peaceful place surrounded by flowers and filled with a serene atmosphere. The moment he opens his eyes, he finds Elfaria. She warns him that the forest is dangerous and says they need to hold hands if they want to get out safely. Meanwhile, the story returns to Julius and the witch. The boy asks what is happening, since Will has remained asleep for 4 days. The witch explains that he is sinking deeper and deeper into his dreams. Thanks to the magic she used, he has been given the opportunity to revisit his own past. Julius asks if this will help him recover his lost memories. The witch admits she is curious to find out as well. According to her, history is engraved into his body. The traces of the connection between the sword and the wand still remain inside him. That is why Will must journey back to his origins. And if everything goes well, he may one day reach the true source of it all. Inside that memory, Will realizes he has returned to the past alongside Elfaria. While he is distracted, she asks if he was thinking about another girl. After all, back home, he is always kind to Claire and everyone else. Will explains that he was only helping his father, but the answer does not satisfy Elfaria. She declares that she does not tolerate cheating. Unsure how to respond, he asks what he must do to be forgiven. The girl replies that she only wants a hug and some head pats. After getting what she wanted, Elfaria suggests that they go hunt monsters together. Will considers the idea dangerous since they are still very young. He reminds her that she is incredibly talented. while he cannot even use magic himself. At that moment, Will notices something strange. Every word coming out of his mouth seems automatic. It is as if he is merely repeating what he said back then. With no control over his own speech, he begins to wonder if he is simply reliving the events of the past. Elfaria, however, tells him not to worry. She shows him the book they both loved so much. According to her, simply carrying that book gives them enough courage to face anything. She also promises to protect him. Hearing that, Will remembers that he was extremely cowardly back then. Because of that, Elfaria was always the one taking the lead and looking after him. This makes him wonder exactly when she began to place more trust in his strength. After walking for quite a while, Elfaria reveals her second secret spell, one she created herself. It is a simple and gentle spell capable of producing small ice candies. She asks Will to keep it a secret and not tell Claire or anyone else. Curious, Will asks why she always gives him those candies. Elfaria replies that he is always sharing everything he has with the children at the orphanage. Besides, whenever he eats the ice candies, a part of her always remains inside him. Shortly afterward, she goes back to reading the book. As he carefully studies one of the illustrations, Will notices that the character depicted looks a lot like Finn. As time passes, sleep begins to overtake him. Noticing this, Elfaria asks him to rest his head on her lap. Will agrees and eventually falls asleep. While he sleeps, she slowly leans in, intending to kiss him. However, before she can do anything, he wakes up, completely embarrassed. She quickly pulls away and drags him along so they can continue searching for the monster. The two eventually arrive in a dark and gloomy part of the forest. Elfaria explains that a war is taking place in a place called Regarden. According to the rumors, many dangerous people and monsters have been fleeing from that region. As a result, some of those creatures have entered the forest and started causing trouble. Hearing this, Will begins to remember what happened. 10 years ago, he and Elfie really did sneak into that place. The two entered the forest behind the orphanage despite his father warning them not to go there. As he tries to recall the rest of the events, something suddenly appears behind them. A monster attacks without warning. Fortunately, Will reacts in time, dodging the strike while pulling Elfaria out of danger. After taking a closer look, she identifies the enemy as a crystal wolf. Will immediately understands the situation. It was a monster created by a maid. Elfaria uses her magic to create several clones and attack the enemy. However, the wolf manages to counterattack and sends the attacks back at the girl. During the battle, Will ends up getting injured. Even without an effective way to defeat the creature, Elfaria remains determined to protect him. Faced with such a desperate situation, Will desperately wishes he had power. Seeing Elfaria on the verge of death, his emotions explode. His entire life, he hated depending on her protection. At that moment, he decided to act. Will stepped in front of Elfaria to protect her. That was how he received all the scars covering his back. Shortly afterward, he lost consciousness. Some time later, the same witch who had previously spoken with Finn appeared before him. She was the one who awakened the power of the sword sleeping within Will. As soon as he regains consciousness, he gets up and charges at the monster. With a single strike, he easily cuts off the creature's arm. At that moment, Will finally understands the truth. Back then, he believed that power was invincible. The reason was simple. He recognized that magic sword as something created through Elfaria's power. Working together, the two defeat the monster without much difficulty. Elfaria is overjoyed to discover that it is magic produced by Will. That was where everything began. Among countless emotions, the bond that still connects the two of them was born. No matter how much time passes, Will never forget that connection with Elfaria. As he awakens from his memories, he finally understands the mana he has used throughout his life. With a new understanding of himself, Will rises and decides to face the final test. The witch then encourages him to create his own story and shine brighter than light itself. And with that, another episode comes to an end. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. See you next week. Until next time. The story shifts to Elfaria, who reflects on Colette's words. The girl had said that she hated the Magia Vander. Because of the spell connected to Elfaria, she knows that Will keeps chasing after her no matter what. Even so, she understands that from Colette's perspective, it looks like she does nothing to help him, remaining at the top of the tower while he faces everything alone. It's no wonder people feel sorry for him. Elfaria understands that feeling. She herself believes that, in a way, she cast a spell on Will. Because of what she placed on him, he ended up getting hurt countless times and had to endure a great deal of suffering. Ever since those first tears that started this entire journey, she can't help but wonder how many times she has made him cry. As she recalls the past, several doubts cross her mind. Should she have lost control at some point? Maybe she should have run away from everything. Or perhaps she should have pretended not to know anything and simply rushed over to hug him. However, her thoughts are soon interrupted by Will's words. In his letter, he said that he felt no hatred at all. On the contrary, he claimed that the reason she was alone was entirely his fault. If anyone deserved to be hated, it was himself. Will Serfort, someone who considered himself talentless. That was exactly why he had to keep moving forward. He had to keep running toward her. He wanted to stay by her side and fulfill the promise they shared. As she rereads those words, Elfaria becomes even more emotional. She knows those letters were what kept her going all this time. Thanks to them, she was able to endure the distance and resist the urge to leave the tower just to see him. Because of that, she makes her decision once again. She will continue waiting and will not break the promise they made. Even so, she admits to herself that there were times when she quietly interfered with events. After all, Will was always there whenever she needed him. Because of that, she constantly thinks about what she can do to help him in return. The scene then shifts to Colette. She is convinced that Elfaria is trying to find a way to help Will. Colette also wants to do something for him, but she feels that her options are limited. The professor fully understands everyone's feelings, but reminds them that they cannot simply abandon the tower. The students respond that they do not want to leave Will behind under any circumstance. To them, titles and positions do not matter right now. Suddenly, Mahana collapses. The professor explains that the teacher in charge of the cauldron, the Hammer Witch, is already taking action. According to him, if they leave the situation in her hands, Will and the others will be fine. Colette, however, does not completely agree. She says they cannot rely solely on others and must do everything they can to help Will. Everyone there knows that the professor spends much of his time looking for ways to support him. The comment embarrasses him, and he immediately suspects that one of the female teachers told them. Colette then emphasizes that they also want to contribute to Will's success. At that moment, Xian steps in and says there is no need to do anything. The others are surprised and ask whether he did not go there specifically to help Will. Xian says he did, but explains his reasoning. According to him, Will made it this far even when everything seemed impossible. He fought countless battles away from everyone's eyes and overcame every obstacle that stood in his way. Therefore, all they need to do is wait. Once again, he will find a way to win. Besides, Xian believes that if someone saved him now, at such a crucial moment, Will would probably feel humiliated. Soon after, the scene shifts to the training room. Emma has been accepted into the Wind faction. Mike managed to join the Dark faction. Meanwhile, Lyral and Gordon became members of the Fire faction. One of the men present expresses his dissatisfaction. In his opinion, the participants' adaptation is still far below expectations, and even those who passed are nothing more than recent graduates. The Magia Vander, however, explained that the students rejected by the observers were actually the ones who developed the greatest adaptability. All of them had to face unfamiliar situations and learned how to master them. The man says that staying there is becoming a waste of time, since Julius and Will still have not shown up. He believes it would be best to end everything immediately. The professor becomes irritated and reminds him that Kreutz is the reason the two of them are late. Kreutz replies that anyone incapable of keeping their commitments should not even be allowed into the tower. However, before the argument can continue, Will and Julius finally arrive. The man becomes furious when he sees them, calling Will a lab rat. He says that he only causes trouble, and informs him that he will be taking the exact same test. Without hesitation, Will accepts. Meanwhile, Julius watches the situation with concern. After everything that has happened, he is not sure whether Will can truly control Wise. He even considers secretly lending him his own magic. But before he can act, something unexpected happens. Elfaria acknowledges his efforts and thanks him for all the help he has given Will. At the same time, the witch watches everything from afar. Thanks to her magic, the gate to Wise was able to be opened. Will then remembers that all the knowledge had been gathered into a single book. After studying and understanding that information, he finally succeeded in unlocking his true power. Everyone is shocked when they see Will using ice magic through Wise. Kreutz, in particular, can hardly believe what he is witnessing. Will then recalls the magic Elfaria cast on him. It was never a curse. From the very beginning, the two of them shared a spell called a promise. He feels that he still has not repaid everything he received from her. Maybe that is why Elfaria started blaming herself. However, to Will, that makes no sense. She gave him countless things over the years. More than anyone else, she was the one who gave him the courage to keep moving forward. Because of that, all he wants now is for her to wait a little longer. He wants to show her how much he has grown, at least one last time. He then unleashes a powerful strike and shatters the target. The spectators realize that his magic is weaker than before, but its power still exceeds the level of intermediate spells. Impressed, the witch decides to award him the highest possible score. At that moment, Finn appears. Since she was the one who sent Will to climb the tower, she chose to respect his wishes and simply watch from a distance. He comments that she did a remarkable job, or perhaps he should address her by her proper title, Headmaster Cauldron of the Magic Academy. The woman replies that, in that form, she prefers to be called Swordsman. She also remarks that using aging spells on herself is extremely exhausting, especially since she still considers herself young. She is also aware that Finn quietly interfered with events. After all, he was the one who gave the rare Wisp gem to the dwarves so they could forge the sword. Finn explains that Will has become a new user of the fifth element and asks her to overlook that small gift. He also says that Will's abilities are still developing. His method of amplifying mana to recharge himself is still quite primitive. However, thanks to the enhancement provided by the silver infused with Wisp, everything works much more efficiently. The professor adds that Will still lacked the experience necessary to use magic through the magic sword. As a result, he ended up paying a heavy price. However, after 6 years of studying at the academy, she finally managed to teach him everything she could. Finn is pleased. To him, the unknown that Swordsman has always sought may be exactly what will reveal to the world. He can barely contain his excitement. Kreutz, on the other hand, completely loses his patience and throws his wand away. Everyone remains amazed by the strength Will has displayed. Shortly afterward, Will realizes that his body has returned to normal. However, he also notices that his energy is drained much faster than during a normal recharge. Because of that, he understands that he cannot use that power carelessly. Even so, Kreutz remains dissatisfied. He argues that it still cannot be considered true magic. Surprisingly, many of those present agree with him, claiming that Will's magic still needs to be studied. Julius is outraged and asks whether they really intend to keep this going. One of the women explains that the situation simply shows how unique Will is. Not even the great mages who lead each faction know exactly how to deal with him. According to her, only those at the top of the tower, the Magia Vander, possess enough authority to make a final decision. However, there is a problem. Since Will and Elfaria are practically family, any action she takes could be viewed as favoritism. Because of that, before Elfaria completely loses her temper, they will need to convince another Magia Vander to support the boy. At that moment, one of them stands up and declares that there is no point in continuing the debate. If they want to uncover the truth, there is only one solution. Zio decides to put Will to the test. A single strike will be enough. If he can overcome it, his abilities will be proven. Zio then unleashes a terrifying attack. Will suffers serious injuries, but he still manages to devour the strike. Seeing this, Finn becomes incredibly excited. He explains that by absorbing the attack, Will was able to charge his sword and reduce the impact by half. Naturally, he could not absorb all of the energy. As a result, part of Zio's massive lightning power burned his body. Even so, he withstood a blow considered almost impossible to block or split apart. Zio watches in surprise. He never expected Will to survive one of his attacks. Excited, he declares that everyone has just witnessed the boy's potential. Will took a direct hit from a Magia Vander and is still standing. To Zio, there is no better proof than that. He officially acknowledges the young man's talent and states that his place is no longer down below. He wants to see him climb the tower as quickly as possible. Even after all of that, however, Kreutz continues insisting that they wait before making a final decision. since the blooming is an important ceremony responsible for determining the factions. Zio decides to end the argument once and for all. He appears in front of the man and asks whether he would be capable of enduring one of his attacks, considering how confidently he has been speaking. According to Zio, if that man is making so many demands, then Kreutz should be able to pass the same test as well. He continues by saying that if the man could not survive the attack, then all that talk about proving someone's worth would become completely meaningless. Without any concern for being polite, he even calls him a four-eyed little punk. Hearing that, the man freezes completely. The shock is so overwhelming that he abandons any attempt to argue and immediately starts running away. Not long afterward, he officially acknowledges Will's right to remain there. At that moment, Elfaria can no longer hold herself back. She runs to Will and hugs him tightly. Tears begin to fall as she apologizes for not being able to help him the way she wanted. Will responds right away. He asks her to stop apologizing. Instead, he just wants to see her smile. After all, after everything he went through, he finally managed to reach the place where she had been waiting for him all this time. The emotional moment, however, lasts only a few seconds, when Will starts to say that he will be joining Elfaria's group. Zio suddenly appears and cuts him off. Without showing any intention of negotiating, he declares that Will be joining his faction. According to Zio, he always gets what he wants. For that reason, he has no intention of losing to Elfaria in this competition. Before Will can finish his response, the situation takes an unexpected turn. Zio acts quickly and knocks the boy unconscious. Elfaria reacts immediately. Annoyed, she glares at Zio and makes it clear just how upset she is. As far as she is concerned, there is one thing she never wants to lose to anyone: Will. The tension rises within seconds. The two take fighting stances, ready to clash at any moment. And that is exactly where the episode comes to an end. In the next chapter, we will see the clash between Ice Roar and Lightning. I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you liked the episode, leave a comment with the word recruited so I know you watched all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and stay tuned for future videos. See you in the next episode. Take care.